Hey guys, welcome to this session on Microsoft Azure. Let us start off with this session with a fun fact. 80% of the world's Fortune 500 companies run on Microsoft Azure either completely or up to an extent. And also Microsoft claims that Azure is growing at a rate of 120,000 new customers every month. And in this session, we'll be learning Microsoft Azure and Azure certifications end to end. And before moving on with this session, please subscribe to our channel so that you don't miss our upcoming videos. And also, if you want to become a certified Azure professional, Intellipaat offers a lot of courses on Azure, and you can check those details in the description. And right now, let us take a quick glance at the agenda. We'll start off with learning what exactly Microsoft Azure is. And after that, we'll be learning what is the core architecture which Microsoft Azure runs on, and also concepts like subscriptions and resources. After that, we'll be learning the core services provided by Microsoft Azure. After learning these core services, we'll be putting them into use by architecting an entire application using Microsoft Azure. And a quiz has been prepared for you guys for you to recap what was taught in this session, and also please feel free to comment those answers below. And after that, for people who are in confusion to choose the app certification course, we have put together a video which shows you what are the different types of certifications available for Azure and also how you can crack them. After that, we'll be looking individually into various certification courses like AZ 103, AZ 203 and also Azure Certification 300-301. So guys, without any further ado, let us move on to the session.
Microsoft Azure, in terms of Microsoft products, like you and I, we both know that at some point of your life in IT or at home, you would have used a Microsoft product. That's how well they have integrated or that's how well they've designed their products, that each and every person on this planet, if they are into IT, they must have used Microsoft products at one point in their life, right? And Microsoft Azure gives you a benefit in terms of using Microsoft products, that it says that if you are on cloud and if you want to use any Microsoft product like Windows or SQL for that matter, AWS, whatever price AWS gives, Azure can give you a price which is 5 times cheaper than that price. The reason for that is very simple, that Microsoft owns the licenses, and hence a license which is basically being bought by Amazon would be costlier to them. And when they give you that license on a shared basis, that is on a timely basis, obviously they'll charge you more. But when it comes to Microsoft, they have those charges in hand because it's their own license, right? So what they tell you is that, dude, you know what, whatever AWS is charging you for that particular instance, for a product, for a software which is by Microsoft, which is running on that server, I'm going to give you that same server in 1/5 of the price. So this is the first advantage that you get with Microsoft Azure, that if you are into Microsoft products, if your application is using any kind of Microsoft product, you will find it 1/5 of the price when compared to AWS. The second thing is that if you have Microsoft licenses, now obviously if you are, let's say, in a business and you are using some Microsoft software, you obviously would have bought some licenses. And when you want to go on to cloud, you do not want to pay for the licenses as well. You just want to pay for, let's say, the server that you're using. Why should you pay for the operating system when you have actually paid for that operating system before, when you purchased it for your office laptop or your office server, right? So what you can do is, or what option Microsoft Azure gives you, is the bring your own license option. So you bring your own license, you give the license key to them, and they will not charge you anything for their licensing. Even the 1/5 cost that they were charging, they will not charge you that if you have your own license, if you have your own Microsoft license and you bring that to the Microsoft Azure cloud. Okay, so that is the second advantage that you get with Microsoft Azure. And the third advantage that you get is that more than 95% of Fortune 500 companies are actually using Microsoft Azure. Now that could be either in the case of a primary cloud provider, or it could be using Microsoft Azure as a secondary cloud provider, or it could be using some products of Microsoft Azure. But if we talk about the companies, the Fortune 500 companies, 95% of them are using Microsoft Azure, right? So if you get yourself certified in Microsoft Azure, you have a 95% probability of hitting a company. If you go to 100 companies, you have a 95% chance that you will be actually landing up in a company which will be using some kind of a Microsoft Azure service, right? So that's a pretty huge number, and that actually gives you a higher probability of getting a job as well in these Fortune 500 companies. So guys, these were the three main advantages as to why Microsoft Azure is being preferred by businesses for their work, right? And that's why companies have now started to shift to Microsoft Azure as well, and that is why it is seeing such a huge exponential growth rate when compared to AWS. Now that you know why are we learning Microsoft Azure, the reason for that is obviously the chances of getting yourself a job in Microsoft Azure is more, right?
Okay guys, a quick info. If you want to become a certified Microsoft Azure professional, Intellipaat provides a master training in Microsoft Azure Certification. They provide AZ 103, AZ 203 and also Azure 300, 301 in the same course. Also, you will be learning all the major concepts required to crack all these certifications, and this makes you a complete Microsoft Azure professional. And for further details about this course, check out the details in the description. So let us continue with the session.
Now let's move on and talk about what exactly Microsoft Azure is, right? So guys, Microsoft Azure is basically a cloud service which is developed by Microsoft, right? It is owned and managed by Microsoft, and it offers you its services in a pay-as-you-go model, and it is the second largest cloud provider in the world, right? So this is what Microsoft Azure is. So whatever I've taught you with regards to the concepts of cloud, all of them are given to you by Microsoft Azure, right? Along with the advantages that I told you, all of that you get with Microsoft Azure, and all you pay for that particular service is based on the number of minutes that you're using its services for, right? That's how amazing cloud is, and that's how amazing even Microsoft Azure is, right? Now let's move forward and talk about how Microsoft Azure basically works, right? So we have discussed enough about what cloud computing is, what is Microsoft Azure. We are all clear with that, why we're using it, why we're learning it today. We're all clear with that. Now let's get into the technical aspects of Microsoft Azure and understand how does basically Microsoft Azure is structured in terms of its architecture. Alright guys, so now let's go ahead and understand the Azure core architecture. So guys, this is the core architecture for Azure. As you can see, there are 4 ways of accessing Azure, right? These 4 components are basically nothing but 4 different ways of accessing the Azure resources, right? So the Azure Resource Manager is basically a mediator between the Azure resources and the external agents which can interact with the Azure resources. Now, to interact with the Azure Resource Manager, you need these 4 ways. Now, what are these 4 ways? The first way is the Azure portal. Now, what is the Azure portal? The Azure portal is nothing but the GUI website that you get provided with, right? For example, if you go to portal.azure.com, once you have signed up on Azure, you can basically go to that portal and you can deploy any kind of resource that you want, right? So you can control and manage the resources from that interface. So that interface is called the Azure portal, right? The next thing is Azure PowerShell. Now, what is Azure PowerShell? So there is a thing called Microsoft PowerShell. So that exists in a Windows system. So if you're using a Windows system, you can just type in your start bar PowerShell and you would be able to see what PowerShell is, right? It's a native Microsoft product. Now, what Azure or what Microsoft provide you with is it also gives you an extension for making your PowerShell interact with Microsoft Azure, right? And once you install that extension, once it's installed on your system, your PowerShell would be able to connect to Microsoft Azure, which will basically give you the ability of controlling or deploying resources on Microsoft Azure using the command line. So that's Azure PowerShell. Similarly, you have something called as Azure CLI. Now, PowerShell, is, like I said, is a product from Microsoft. Azure CLI is basically done on the DOS prompt, right? So DOS is altogether a different software which has been there since ages on Windows. right? So if you're more inclined towards using the DOS prompt, you can actually install the necessary softwares for Azure, and then you can use the DOS commands to use or manage or deploy Azure resources. So this is a third way of accessing your Azure resources. And then you have something called as REST clients. Now, what are REST clients? REST clients are nothing but they are APIs which you can include in your web applications, right? For example, you can create your own web application through which you can create or use your Azure account. For example, let's say you create a website wherein you take the user input, you take an integer number from the user, and then you have created a button which is called deploy. And what that does is whatever number you have mentioned, it basically deploys that many number of servers on Microsoft Azure, right? But you are not basically doing that directly from the Azure portal, or you're not doing it that through the PowerShell, or you're not doing that through Azure CLI. What you have done is you have created your own application, and you have linked your application to your Azure account, and you're making that website, or you're allowing that website basically to control your Azure resources. And this is possible using APIs, which are also called REST clients, right? Now, these resources, in case of Azure PowerShell and Azure CLI, they would interact with the help of SDKs to connect to Azure Resource Manager, your Azure portal, and your REST clients can directly interact with the Azure Resource Manager. And what is an Azure Resource Manager? Like I previously stated, it's nothing but a mediator. So basically, what happens is all the resources which are deployed on Azure, they are not directly accessible by the user, even if he's using the website or using the PowerShell or using the CLI or using the REST clients. Every request has to go to the Azure Resource Manager, and what the Azure Resource Manager does is it basically authenticates your request. It will check whether you, as a user of a Microsoft Azure account, have the necessary permissions to do a certain task which you're trying to do with your application. For example, when you create a Microsoft Azure account, you would have the option of creating multiple users in that same account so that multiple people can work on your own account. For example, let's say you start a startup or you open a startup, right? And now you have hired a tech team. Now, what you want to do is you want your CTO, or the person who's going to be managing your tech team, the admin access of your Azure account. And on the other hand, the developers who probably, let's say, if one of the developers is going to work on the Azure storage, right? So you just want him to access Azure storage. You don't want him to access Azure VMs or any other kind of Azure service. So what you can do is you can create a user, and you can give definite permissions as to what he can access and what he cannot access. Okay, now how will this be helpful? Now let's say your technical manager, he signs in as a user, right? And he signs in, let's say, through the Azure portal, and then he tries to deploy a VM resource or a virtual machine, or he tries to use a storage account. You would be able to do so. Why? Because he has the administrator access you have given him, and he'd be able to do everything that you can do. On the other hand, let's say now your developer comes in, he also logs in through the Azure portal, he also sees everything which is there, right? But the moment he tries to deploy a virtual machine, because he has to go through, all his requests would be going through the Azure Resource Manager. When the Azure Resource Manager authenticates this guy and sees whether he has the permissions to launch a virtual machine or not, basically the authentication fails. So the authenticator will basically say, no, this guy does not have that permission. So Azure Resource Manager will not take your request forward. It will basically revert you back with the error message saying you do not have the sufficient permissions to carry out this task, right? And this is the sole reason we need a mediator between our Azure resources and the various ways through which we can use Azure. Now, this would be the same case with Azure PowerShell. This would be the same case with Azure CLI. When you use Azure PowerShell with your Azure account, you obviously have to enter your credentials. In case of a developer, he will be entering his credentials that you have given to him, right? and those basically just have the access to the storage. And again, you would also get the same kind of message in Azure PowerShell. Similarly, you will get the same kind of message in Azure CLI and even in the REST clients, right? So when you connect your website to your Azure account, again, you will get a key and a secret access key, right? Or in other case, what you'll have to do is you'll have to include some metadata on your server on which you're hosting that website, and that metadata would basically authenticate you to the Azure account. So for every user, you get a different kind of credentials for your metadata. In case of your developer, you will get a different set of credentials, and those credentials would basically, when they'll be authenticated, they would get, or they will inherit the same properties or the same permissions that the developer account has. And accordingly, your Azure Resource Manager will authenticate and check whether you have the required permissions or not, right? And accordingly, you would be able to do the operations. So guys, summing up, or just revisiting what we just studied. So there are basically four ways to access Azure. You have Azure Portal, Azure PowerShell, Azure CLI, and you have REST clients, right? All of these, they interact through the Azure Resource Manager, and the Azure Resource Manager, based on what kind of permissions you have, it basically routes your request to the necessary service and carries out the task for you, right? So this is a gist of how Azure works in the backend. Now let's move forward and talk about the front end, the middleware, and the services. Right. So the front end, as we discussed, there were four ways of accessing Azure services, which were, this is the Azure portal, this is the Azure PowerShell, this is the Azure CLI, and then you have the REST lines. The middleware was nothing but it was the Azure Resource Manager. We'd be discussing that. And then you have the services that we'll be discussing in a few moments, right?
Okay guys, a quick info. If you want to become a certified Microsoft Azure professional, Intellipaat provides a master training in Microsoft Azure Certification. They provide AZ 103, AZ 203 and also Azure 300, 301 in the same course. Also, you'll be learning all the major concepts required to crack all these certifications, and this makes you a complete Microsoft Azure professional. And for further details about this course, check out the details in the description. So let us continue with the session.
So let's start off with the front end part, the front end components. So what is the Azure portal? So guys, the Azure portal looks something like this, right? So it's a GUI component that you get on your web browser. And on your web browser, you can see on the left hand side, you have things as all resources, you have web apps, you have SQL databases. You can just select the service that you want, and you can subsequently launch it. We'll be discussing more on this as we move along. I'll be showing you guys the portal. I'll be showing you guys how you can use it to deploy resources. For now, we're just understanding what the Azure portal looks like, and this is what it looks like, right? On the right hand side, you get all kind of widgets. So these are widgets. These are called widgets, which show different kind of information, right? So you'll have the option of including these widgets on a dashboard. More on this we will talk as we move along in the session. So guys, this was the Azure portal. This is the Azure PowerShell. So I told you guys, Microsoft has launched its own command line, which now comes with Windows integrated, which is called PowerShell. If you want to use that PowerShell with your Azure account, what you'll have to do is you'll have to download some libraries, which will help your PowerShell to basically connect to Azure. And once you do that, you would basically see something like this, Windows Azure PowerShell. And now you can enter the PowerShell commands, which will basically help you to connect to your Azure account and carry out whatever you want in a command line fashion, right? Similarly, if you're into DOS, you can actually go ahead and use Azure CLI. So DOS commands are different from PowerShell, and there could be a scenario wherein you're better at DOS commands than your PowerShell commands. And if that is the case, you can actually go ahead and just install the libraries for Azure CLI, and then you can actually use it in the DOS environment, right? In this case also, if you want to manage your Azure resources like you were managing it through PowerShell, through command line statements, you can do a similar kind of way in Azure CLI as well. But the commands that you'd be entering over here, they'd be more in line with DOS commands. On the other hand, when we talk about PowerShell, we would be using PowerShell commands to control Azure in that case. Okay, so this was Azure CLI, guys. And the last topic is REST clients. So REST clients, as I already told, these are nothing but APIs that you use on your website. So you'll have to authenticate them using the metadata credentials, and these credentials would be available for all the accounts that are created under a root Microsoft Azure account. So each credential would be different from each other uh, based on if there are more users. For example, in our case, we created a user for our IT manager, and then we created a user for a software developer. For our software developer, we just gave him the storage access. For our IT manager, we basically gave him the administrator access. So when they put their credentials down in the code of their web application and they try to connect to Azure, based on the permissions that they have, they would be able to access the resources. In case they do not have the permission, you will get a corresponding error to that this particular user does not have the necessary permissions to access that particular resource. Alright guys, so these were the front end components of the Azure core architecture. Now let's talk about the middleware, the component which basically acts as a mediator between your touch points, that is your front end components, and the core components, which is the Azure resources. So it acts as a mediator, the Azure Resource Manager. So Azure Resource Manager, it basically helps you to deploy and manage the Azure resources, right? It also helps you to organize resources in Azure. For example, it will help you in grouping resources together. Let's say I'm launching a web application, okay, and I'm also at the same time launching some other application. Let's say I'm also launching my Android app backend service. So what I can do is, let's say if I'm launching a web application, I would need certain components. I would need, let's say I need a separate storage for my web application, right? So I can create a storage account, I would create a web app, and then I would create a database server. Now, if I create it just like that in Azure and you try to see all the resources, you would not be able to make out as to which resources are there for my Android application and which resources are there for my web application. What you can do is probably you can define a nomenclature, and then you can say probably you can name your instances like let's say for Android database, you can say Android underscore database. For your web application, you can say web app underscore database. So that's one way of sorting it out. But Azure Resource Manager makes it easy for you. How does it make it easy? It basically gives you the ability to create groups, right? So if you're creating one kind of an application, what you can do is you can create a group, and inside that group, you can basically just map the resources or launch the resources that are specifically there for that particular application. For example, for a web application, I can launch all the resources that I want, and I can group them together in the web application group, right? I can name the group anything. It's just like a folder, guys. If you were to understand it more simply, understand it's just for sorting out resources. Let's say you have a desktop full of files, and those files are PDFs, TXTs, and doc documents. So what you can do is you can just create 3 folders, and inside those 3 folders, you can put your doc folders. Inside the PDF folder, you can put PDF files. And inside the text files, you can put the text files, right? So this is the way of sorting on your desktop. Similarly, if you want to sort your resources in Azure, you can use the ability of creating resource groups using the Azure Resource Manager, right? And at the same time, the third point or the third feature of Azure Resource Manager is it authenticates, it checks what all permissions you have, and based on that, it gives you the ability to control your Azure resources, right? So it also authenticates your calls to the Azure resources, and only through the Azure Resource Manager would your calls go, and if they are accepted by the Azure Resource Manager, only then they will be forwarded. Otherwise, they would be rejected and you would get an appropriate message for that. All right. So, guys, this was all about the Azure Resource Manager. So, I was talking to you about what a resource group is. So, as you can see, let's say this is a resource group of mine. And what I want to do is I want to group all these 3 resources. So, my VM instance that I launch, that is termed as a resource. If I launch a web app, that is also termed as a resource. Don't worry if you don't understand what is a virtual machine, what is a web app. I would talk more about this as we move along in the session. But for now, understand that any service in Azure, any instance that you launch in Azure, that is basically a resource, right? And when you group one or more resources together, or I should say two or more resources together for a particular thing, which, so I gave you the analogy of folders. If you group them together and that symbolizes something, that basically can be done using resource groups, and that is exactly what is specified in the figure as well, right? So you have some virtual machines, you have app service, and you have SQL database, and you have all grouped them together in a resource group, and probably you can call it, let's say, the production environment. You can create a test environment, call the resource group a test environment, and deploy the necessary resources inside that as well.
Okay guys, a quick info. If you want to become a certified Microsoft Azure professional, Intellipaat provides a master training in Microsoft Azure Certification. They provide AZ 103, AZ 203 and also Azure 300, 301 in the same course. Also, you will be learning all the major concepts required to crack all these certifications, and this makes you a complete Microsoft Azure professional. And for further details about this course, check out the details in the description. So let us continue with the session.
So guys, with this we come to an end of the Azure core architecture. So by now you understand the nitty-gritties of how Azure works in the backend, right? How things are structured inside Azure. Moving forward, guys, now we'll be talking about the Azure services, right? So we'll be talking about the resources that we just saw, the resources that we were grouping inside the resource group, or the resources which basically the Azure Resource Manager was managing. We're going to talk about those, and those are nothing but services in Azure, right? So it'll become more clear as we move along. So let's start off now with core Azure services. Alright guys, so before starting off with the services, guys, there's again a simpler way to understand all the services in Azure. What Azure has done is, let's say there are around 300 plus services in Azure, right? Now, it is difficult to actually remember all those services or to basically know how one service is different from the other. So what Azure has done is it has actually divided its services based on what the services does or what the services do, right? So the major sections that it has divided its services in are these, right? So these are not all the sections that Azure gives us the services in, but these are all the important sections or the important domains in which Azure provides you services. And as a cloud engineer or as a Azure engineer, when you'll be working in companies, mostly you would be working on services which are included in these domains, right? So we'll be covering these. Guys, there is no Azure engineer out there who would be knowing each and every service in Azure, right? But what we as learners can do is we can learn all the important services which are basically used in your everyday life when you become a cloud engineer, right? And as and when you apply to companies, probably you can tell them you know all the basic services, all the important services in Azure, and if there is any special requirement for a particular service that they use, it is obviously going to be an easier task for you since you understand how Azure works. So understanding one more service in Azure would not be a great deal. But most of the times, I would say 90% of the things that you would be doing as a cloud engineer, or 90% of the services that you would be using or working on as a cloud engineer would be covered under these domains. So now let's go ahead and start off with the first domain, which is compute. But before that, let me give you a brief about all of these domains, right? So the first domain is compute. So in compute, you have compute intensive resources wherein you get raw processing power. More on this we will talk about as we move along. Then the second kind of domain is networking. So this particular domain would include all the services which provide you with networking capabilities, right? Then we have the storage domain, which basically gives you all the services in Azure, which can basically give you the capability of storing some files, right? And obviously there are a lot of services in storage, and each service is targeted at a different kind of use case. So we're going to discuss some of the storage services in Azure which are very prominent. Then you have services related to database and analytics, right? So if you want to store textual data, which also you want to analyze using graphs or using flowcharts, right? You can do that in Azure in the domain database plus analytics. Then our next domain comes out to be AI and machine learning. Now this is a very important domain, guys, and I've seen actually people who are data scientists, people who are researching on data science. So basically when you're working on data science or when you're working with AI, you need a lot of computing power, right? Now, the good thing about cloud is that it offers you a pay-as-you-go model, which basically means you only pay for the time you use the resources for, right? And nobody can afford a high spec machine. If you need an i7, an octa-core processor, and a 32 GB RAM, it's very difficult for a layman to get hold of such kind of a machine. So what researchers and what data scientists can do is they can actually launch a machine on Azure with a similar spec that they want for their use case, use it for the time they want and shut it off. And you'll be charged as low as around 0.05 or $0.06, I guess, for if you use it for around half an hour or so, right? So I guess half an hour or 45 minutes should be enough if you want to do a POC, or if you're even into researching, or if you're into testing. I guess this would be the cheapest option for you, rather than getting a full-blown server or a full-blown laptop with high specs and all. That will be more expensive for you. So it's better if you use services from cloud for your compute intensive needs. But that is not it. What you get in AI and machine learning domain is you get a pre-built dashboard kind of a thing. So you don't have to feed in algorithms. Everything is pre-built in Azure. You basically get a drag and drop kind of a functionality when you're particularly using Azure ML, because I've used that. I'm telling you, it's pretty drag and drop. If you compare it with its counterparts, let's say if you want to do a regression test in R, you would actually have to write a long script to do a particular thing. But the kind of services that Azure has launched, for example, like I mentioned, Azure ML, all you have to do is drag and drop and you can get your results, right? So that's how convenient it is. And that's why people are more and more, to save their time, to save on their costs, they're actually using the AI and machine learning capabilities of the cloud. And in particular, we are talking about Azure. So Azure also has AI and machine learning services, which also we will be discussing as we move along in the session, right? Then the next domain is identity. So identity domain would basically include services which will help you in authenticating users. It will help you to basically get the metadata credentials that we discussed earlier for your website. So all the authentication part, the authorization part, whenever you want to give specific permissions to particular users, all of that can be managed with the identity services. And lastly, we would be discussing the domain which is management, which would basically include services such as monitoring. It would include services such as infrastructure as code, right? Don't worry about these big words, guys. As we move along, everything will be clear. But without wasting time, let's jump on to our first domain, which is compute, and let's understand what are the different services that we're going to understand in that, right? So in compute, guys, you basically have four prominent services. You have virtual machines, you have function apps, you have app service, and then you have the Azure Kubernetes service. So the first service that we're going to discuss about is the Azure Virtual Machine service. Now, what is that? Now, guys, Azure virtual machines are nothing but it's basically a server, or I can say in the most layman terms possible, let's just say it's a computer, just like a laptop, which has just installed Windows on it and nothing else is there, right? For example, let's say you buy a laptop. What is the first thing that you see? You see your Windows there, or you see your Mac OS there, or you see your Linux operating system there, and basically no software is installed. It's just the bare minimum operating system which is given to you, and whatever you want to do on your laptop, you install it and then you work on, right? So similarly, virtual machines are there. Virtual machines are nothing but they are machines that are launched by your cloud provider, which in our case is Azure, and they launch it for you. So you don't have to worry about where are they getting it from. They launch it for you, and what they do is they give you the remote access to it, right? So it's basically like working on your own laptop, but working on it from a remote location. So similarly, you get your own machine on Azure, which is freshly made, right? You have a fresh operating system on it. There are no softwares installed, and whatever you want, you can install on this particular server. So we call it server because basically you would be using it for deploying applications, which would be basically be available to the user. So that's why we call it a server, right? So basically these are server or computers that are launched by Azure for your own personal use, but you would be accessing it remotely. If it's a Windows machine, in a GUI case, you can basically do an RDP and use it. If it's a Linux machine, you can do basically do an SSH and you can work on the command line for it. But remember guys, there are no softwares installed on it. There are no extra softwares installed on it. So anything that you want this server to do, for example, let's say you want to create a database server, you can just install database on it and it'll be ready, right? And it'll be ready for accepting requests for the database service. If you want it to be a web server, you can basically install Apache, PHP, etc. And then you can put your website on it. It'll become a web server. Anything and everything that you want or that you can do on your laptop, you can do on virtual machines. So this is what Azure Virtual Machines is, guys. Now, the next kind of service is similar to virtual machines, but it's actually an advanced version of virtual machines. So what are function apps? So guys, function apps is like I said, it's an advanced version of virtual machine in which you do not get the access of the operating system. Okay, so let me give you an example. For example, let's say you are doing some work on a website, and that website basically, let's say, does processing for you. For example, let's say you are on Facebook, and what you do is you upload a profile picture, and once you upload a profile picture, let's say you want to crop that profile picture to a particular size, and then you want to upload it as an image on your Facebook. So what will happen? So you will upload your image on the Facebook app. You will do the cropping part. Let's say you want to add a filter as well, you add that filter and then you click on save, and then you want it to be uploaded as a profile picture on your Facebook, right? So there is a minimum amount of processing that would have to be done on your image. Some processing has to be done on your image, right? And basically how that works is that processing is actually not done on your phone or on your computer on which you're accessing Facebook. That is actually done on the Facebook servers. But the way they handle it is they basically would have a web server in place. They would separately have a database server in place which would be interacting with your web server. And for the processing, they have a separate server. Okay, and that separate server is basically called a backend server. And what does that backend server do? All the requests which comes in, it basically processes it and gives out the result. That's the sole job of a backend server. And why is it separate? Why is it not integrated with the web server? The simple reason for that is, let's say there are 100 users who are using your website, right? And they're constantly exploring your website, going through the UI, doing uploading images, doing processing and everything. Now your backend component is doing the image processing, and the front end component of yours, which is the website component of yours, is basically serving the website to the users, right? So there are two tasks happening over there, and let's say any one of them, they get overloaded with some work, right? That would hamper the performance of the second component. Let's say there are more users on the website, right? So obviously your web component or the website component of your server would require more processing power. So let's say it takes up 60% of the processing. And let's say what happens is all these people who came in, they upload their profile pictures and they put some filter on and they now want to process it. So one thing is your server is already busy serving these 100 people your website, and the CPU mark is at 60%. Now because of the processing load which is coming onto your backend component, that also requires around 80% CPU to work efficiently. But now because 60% has already been taken by your website server, there's only 40% left. So what will happen in this case? Your server will inadvertently become slow, right? It'll become slow, and it might even crash in case a deadlock situation happens, right? And this was usually the case when we were not aware of distributed computing. But nowadays what happens is we are dealing in a world where we cannot afford downtime, and that is the reason everything has been distributed, right? So if there is more load on my backend server is going to handle it. It will not hamper the performance of my website server or my database server. So every software component is now distributed. And why are we discussing this? We are discussing this because we are talking about function app. Now what is a function app? Function app is nothing but a backend service on which you do not have to deal with the operating system like you do in virtual machines. You do not get an access to the operating system. You cannot install any kind of software on it. Whatever you choose, let's say say you have an option of choosing what kind of backend code you want to run on the function app. Let's say your image processing, whatever code you have written for the image processing app, let's say you have written it in Python. So when you will be deploying a function app, what you'll be choosing is what kind of code would I be uploading on the function app. Let's say you choose Python. The next thing that you would be doing is you would be clicking on next, and then it will make your function app ready, and then it will ask you for the code for the image processing. You give in the code, you click on save, and now your backend server is ready to accept requests. That's it. So now all your website server has to do is ping the backend server with the required information with the image. It will basically take the image, it will run through the code, see what it has to be done, do the processing on the image, and give the image back to the website server or to the Facebook servers, which will basically upload the profile picture, right? So in a gist, what is function app? A function app is basically a service which will not give you access to the operating system. It will basically give you one dashboard on which you can upload code, and it can do any task for you. All you have to do is give it work, it will do for you, and that's about it. You don't have to mess around with anything else. You don't have to worry about what machine size I should give to my function app. You don't have to worry about how many machines should I run so that my function app never gets overloaded. Everything is managed by Azure. All you have to do is give in the code and see your application working. So these kind of applications are basically called platform as a service. And the earlier service that we discussed was virtual machine. It's basically called infrastructure as a service. Why infrastructure as a service? Because in that case, you got access to the operating system, right? You can do anything on that server. You can install anything. You can actually delete everything also, and you can make that server hang, or you can make that server not working. You can actually uninstall the installation files of the operating system as well. That is something that you can do with your server. But what will happen is it will not cause any harm to Azure. Basically, you would not be able to use the server, and in the far end time, you'll basically have to delete it because it won't be usable. That's the most extreme thing which could happen. But the case with function app is because it's a platform as a service, it's giving you a dashboard on which you can upload code, and hence it's a platform, right? It is not giving you access to the operating system. It is not giving you access to what softwares you can install. You just choose the environment in which your code can run, and that's it. That's what a function app is all about. It's a backend server without choosing or worrying about the underlying infrastructure. Moving forward, the next service that we have is app service. App service is yet another platform as a service kind of resource that we have in Azure. And what you can do with app services, you can basically launch or deploy websites. Now, you would be wondering that in function app also I can just give my code and probably I can give my website code and it will deploy the website for me. No, your function app can only give outputs based on the inputs. It cannot deploy a web application for you. If you want to deploy a web application, you would have to use app service. In app service, you would find a resource called web app. You'll have to deploy that. And on that, you will basically get again a dashboard. Since it's a platform as a service, you will again get a dashboard where you will be able to upload your website files. And once you do that, once the process is finished, you will basically get a link. And if you click on that link, you can see your website, right? So again, we did not get access to the operating system. We do not have control on what softwares are installed. The basic way the app service works is, or in our case, since we are discussing about websites, our web app works is, it'll ask you what kind of code is your website written in. Let's say my website is written in Node.js. So I'll just select Node.js and I'll click on next. And the next question they'll ask is, do you want to auto scale when the CPU increases or when the memory is low? Do you want to auto scale? You will say yes, I want to auto scale. You'll click on next, and it does everything for you. And at the end, what you get is again a web UI on which you will have a button called upload, on which you just have to upload your website and everything would be set for you, right? There is also an option to just directly mention the GitHub link. It'll pull the code from GitHub and it'll deploy whatever code was there on GitHub. But the keyword here is it deploys application for you in function app. So this is a very tricky thing, that what is the difference between function app and a web app. So function app only does the backend tasks for you. You give it code, it will take an input, it will give you the output. That's it. It is not used to deploy an application. App service, on the other hand, it is only used to deploy an application. Okay, so this is the main difference between a function app and an app service. A next service is probably a very important service when you're working in a containerization environment. So I'm sure most of you know about what Docker is. If you don't know, just type on YouTube Docker tutorial by Intellipaat. Go through that video and you would be able to understand what Docker is. So Docker is nothing but a containerization platform on which you can deploy applications. So we were talking about distributed computing, right? So containers are nothing but they act as separate virtual entities which are isolated from each other. So I can launch an Ubuntu container, I can launch a CentOS container, I can launch a different flavor of Linux container as well, right? In them, I can install any software I want, and exactly whatever code files I want, I can put on those containers, and these containers can then interact and mimic a distributed application kind of a scenario, right? Now, what Kubernetes is, it manages these containers for you. It's an automatic service which manages these containers. What does it manage? Let's say, I deploy 3 containers. One is my website container, one is my backend container, and one is my database container. Now for some reason my backend container is not working. Okay, it stops working. Now what will happen? What should ideally happen? Ideally, if my backend server stops working, I need to get an alert. I will go there, I will see what the problem is, I will fix it, and then my backend container or backend server will again be ready and my application would serve normal. But what happens is you cannot monitor an application 24/7. So what Kubernetes does for you is it does all the manual tasks for you. So it automatically detects that a fault has occurred in a particular container, and what it does is it deletes that container and launches a new copy of it automatically, right? And this is just one of the tasks that Kubernetes does automatically for you. You can also configure Kubernetes to scale your containers for you or descale your containers for you. And it can do a host of other things, and we would discuss it probably when we move along, and when we just are focusing on Azure Kubernetes for service, we can actually talk more about it because there are loads of features in it. But this is again a very important service. So most of the startup companies, not MNCs, but most of the startup companies have now adopted the container architecture, or have now made their code into fit into containers, and now they are using the Kubernetes service. If I were to give you a little background of the Kubernetes service, the Kubernetes service was actually developed by the Google company. Later, they made it open source, and now it's available to the world. Anybody can use it or download for free and can actually install it on their system, right? But when you install it on your system, you actually have to manage Kubernetes all by yourself. So what Azure does is it has created platform as a service again, and it says, I will handle the Kubernetes installation, I will handle the Kubernetes configuration. You just tell me what you want, and I will deploy that in a Kubernetes cluster for you, right? So all the advantages of Kubernetes you get, and you also don't have to deal with Kubernetes. So this is the power of cloud. This is what Azure is giving you as a service, right? And this is what Azure Kubernetes service was all about.
Okay guys, a quick info. If you want to become a certified Microsoft Azure professional, Intellipaat provides a master training in Microsoft Azure Certification. They provide AZ 103, AZ 203 and also Azure 300, 301 in the same course. Also, you will be learning all the major concepts required to crack all these certifications, and this makes you a complete Microsoft Azure professional. And for further details about this course, check out the details in the description. So let us continue with the session.
Alright guys, so now let's get down to the interesting part. Let's now start off with a hands-on where you will get a taste of how basically Azure portal looks like, and also how things work out, how you deploy resources on Azure. And basically, in the most essence, we learned about what a VM is. So we're going to see how we can actually launch a VM inside Microsoft Azure. Alright, so just give me a minute. I'll just switch on to my portal and then we will start on with the demo. Now, before moving over there, guys, these are the 3 things that we're going to do. So when we were learning the architecture, I told you guys that basically all the resources that are deployed in Azure can be managed, or they can be grouped together using resource groups. So the first thing that we're going to do is we're going to create a resource group which will have the name demo environment. Okay. Then what we're going to do is, in this demo environment, basically we're going to launch a virtual machine which will have a Linux operating system on it. Now, once it is deployed, we will try to connect to this virtual machine using the putty tool that is available for doing SSH on Linux. So basically, whenever you're installing or whenever you're launching a Linux instance, a way to connect to a Linux instance is using SSH, right? Because it's a command line operating system, and everything and anything that you want to do on this operating system, you can do it on the command line. On the contrary, if you deploy a Windows machine, in that case, you have to use the remote desktop protocol. So it's basically called RDP. And there's a software for that which can basically connect using RDP. So that is inbuilt in Windows. So if you're on a Windows machine, just type remote desktop, right? And you'll get that application. The only thing it'll ask is the IP address, click on connect, and then it'll ask for the password. Alright guys, so without wasting any more time, let's go ahead, switch to my Azure portal, and let's see how it looks like, right? So guys, this is my Azure portal. So let me just go to home and let me show you how it actually looks like. So this is how your portal looks like, guys. This is the web GUI that we were talking about. Now, there are some resources that are already launched in my Microsoft Azure, right? So as you can see, I've named my resources something like this, but let's say I'm going to deploy a Linux VM now, right? And that Linux VM is only for demo purposes. Now, this will actually give you a take as to how you can, or how resource groups basically can help you guys. Now, if I go to all resources right now, you can see these are all the resources which are deployed on Azure right now, but I do not know which resource is doing what, or which resource is contributing to what application. On the contrary, if I go to resource groups, you can see that there is a group which is called Intellipaat, which exists on my Microsoft Azure portal. And if I go inside this resource group, I would be able to see all the resources which have been deployed. So now what I'm going to do is, because what I'm doing right now is just for demo purpose. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to add a resource group. So let me just click on add, and let us create a resource group by the name demo environment. So I'll type in demo -env, right? And let's say the region that we have to choose, always choose a region, guys, which is nearer to you. So what do you mean by region? So region basically means, now Microsoft Azure is so huge that it has deployed, or it has set up its data centers in different countries. The reason they have done so is because let's say you have your application in, or you have a startup and you have actually started it up in, let's say, India, right? And your application is actually only accessed by the Indian audience, right? So that's whom you cater to. So what you can do is, rather than deploying, so it makes more sense to deploy your application or your website on in a region which is nearer to your audience, because in that case, the internet routes, it'll be far lesser when you compare it with launching your application in some other country. For example, let's say we launch this resource, or we create this resource group in let's say US, right? But my target audience is basically in India. Now what is going to happen? Now when my target audience is in India, and let's say I'm going to the Intellipaat.com website, that is my application, every time the data is being fetched from the US and it is being transferred to the Indian servers, and then from your ISP you are getting the data on your system. Now, if we were to make, or if we were to deploy our application in India itself, what will happen is that the distance that the data has to be data will cover will be less, and that will significantly increase your response time of the website, right? So that is why choosing a region is very important. You can choose any region you want, but I would suggest you choose a region which is more nearer to you, right? So in our case, let's scroll down and see if we have any region which are nearer to me. So I can see that we have a region in India which is called South India. So let us select that, right? All right. So now the region that my resource is getting deployed is in South India, right? So that's what I've selected. The name that I've given is demo environment. And now let's go ahead and click on review plus, right? So this is what is going to happen. The subscription is going to be pay as you go. If you are under free tier, you will see free tier. The resource group, this is the name that I've given, and the region on which this is being deployed is South India. Let's click on create. So now my resource group is being created, right? And if I do a little refresh over here, I can see that my demo environment resource group is present here. Now what I want to do, the next step that I have to do, let me just go back to my slide, is to deploy a Linux VM in this demo environment resource group. So let's do that. Let us come back to our Azure portal. And now what we want to do is we want to deploy a virtual machine. So you will see on the left hand side that there is a service called virtual machines. Let's select that. And now what I have to do is I have to click on add, right? So because I want to create a virtual machine. So I'll click on add. Now it'll ask you which resource group do you want to make this server available in. So I want to basically make it available in demo environment. So this is what I've selected. What do I want my virtual machine name to be? Let's say I want my virtual machine name to be new VM-Linux. Okay, this is what the name is. The region, I want it to be nearer to me, so I'll select as South India, right? Availability options, if you go ahead and choose it, you will have an option between availability set or no infrastructure redundancy required. So what is redundancy? Redundancy basically means, do you want a copy of your server somewhere else as well, so that let's say in the data center where this server is going to be deployed, that data center goes down, right? Or something happens and the data gets corrupted. So if you choose that you want to replicate your server, what will happen is, even if there is a downtime in a particular data center in which your VM was deployed, your redundant server will come into power, and that is from where you will get your data. So basically it increases the availability of your application, and even if there is a problem from the Azure side, your application will not go down. But since we are doing a demo, what we'll select is no infrastructure redundancy required. What is the image that you want? So by image we mean the operating system. What kind of operating system do you want to connect to, right? So you have all these operating systems over here. I can actually launch a Windows 10 Pro, I can launch a Windows Server, I can launch Ubuntu 16, I can launch Debian 9, CentOS, SUSE Linux, Red Hat, Ubuntu Server, right? So for our sake, let's consider Ubuntu Server is what we want to deploy. And now it'll ask me what is the size of the machine that you want to give, right? So what you can do is you can actually change the size. So by default, it will say you should deploy a 2 CPU and an 8 GB machine. You can just click on change size and you will have all these options available to you, right? So you can see that because what we are going to do is a demo. So what you can see over here is 0.5 GB RAM and a 1 CPU will basically cost me around 383 rupees per month, right? So let's go ahead and try to deploy this machine, right? So this makes more sense because we are only doing a demo, and probably I'll delete it after this session, right? So I've selected this and I'll click on select now. So you can see it's 1 vCPU and 0.5 GB memory. Great. Next thing it is asking me is what is the authentication type that you want to give on this particular machine. You can either choose the SSH public key, or what you can choose is password, right? So if you want to choose SSH public key, what you'll have to do is you'll have to generate a SSH public key, right? If you choose password, what it will ask is the username and the password. And this is basically the most standard way of doing it, but if you want to give security to your instance, the suggested method would be to create a public key. Now, how can you create a public key? There is a software called PuttyGen, right? And the way you can download it is just type on Google Putty download, right? And then you will get a link from putty.org. Just click on that. And you will see this link which says download Putty. Just click over here. Right now you will get all the versions on which you can using which you can basically install Putty. Now what we are basically looking for is PuttyGen, right? So you will find it over here based on your CPU architecture. You can basically select PuttyGen and then you can download. Once PuttyGen is downloaded, it will look something like this. So as you can see, it's Putty key generator. What I want to do is I want to generate a public private key. So let's click on generate. Now what it'll ask is you'll have to hover your mouse here for some randomness, and it will create a key based on that. So let's hover our mouse in this region, and now it has created the key for me. Now it says the public key for pasting into open SSH authorized key file. So this is the public key basically, right? And you will have to copy this. Let's copy it. Right, so this is my public key. Now let's come back to my portal. So I can just choose SSH public key and I can paste the public key over here, and this is how it works. Now if your key is verified, what you will get is a tick mark over here, which basically means that a key has been verified, and now you can go ahead, right? So my key is now verified. What is the next step that I'll have to do? The next step that I'll have to do is I'll have to save the private key. Okay, so this is the public key which has been generated. What I have to do is I have to save the private key, which I'll be using to connect to my instance. So in this case, you basically do not have to use any password. If you have this particular file, which will basically be saved once I click on yes, let's say I save it on the desktop, or let me actually save it somewhere else. Let me save it in C drive, and let me actually create let's say in the app folder, I'm just creating this private key file, and let's name it as Azure -key. Okay, and now I'll click on save. So my PPK has now been saved. If I want to go there, I can just go to C, I'll go to app, and I can see that Azure -key PPK is now present over here. Great. So this is done. Now I'll have to specify the username. So let's specify the username as Azure. You can specify any username that you want, right? So we have specified it as Azure. Now the next thing that it is asking is, do you want any inbound ports to be enabled on this particular instance? Now we will be connecting to this instance from our machine, right? And the protocol that we'll be using is SSH. So we'll have to open the SSH port. So we'll have to click on allow selected ports. And what port do I want to allow? I want to allow SSH port. Okay. Let's select HTTP also. Why? I'll tell you that in a few moments once we have the Linux machine up and running, right? In case this was a Windows machine, I will also have to enable the RDP port, which you can just tick over here. In my case, I don't need the RDP port. I just need SSH, and I need HTTP too. The use for it, I'll tell you as we move along. Alright, so I want SSH and HTTP to be enabled, and what I can now do is I can just click on review plus create, and now it will basically just show me all the configuration for my VM, which is going by default, right? I can just review it, and that will be it, right? Now I'll show you something very interesting over here. Once this loading is complete. So as you know, cloud computing, it doesn't charge you per month, but basically the pricing model is a per hour kind of a thing, right? So as you can see, the machine that I'm launching right now is 50 paisa per hour. This is the rate, or this is basically the pricing of my machine that I'm gonna launch. So that's awesome. Right, the next thing is the OS which is being launched is Ubuntu Server 18.04. That is also great. And if you want, you can actually look at the username, which is Azure. What are the public inbound ports? It's SSH and HTTP. The disk type is SSD. Is it a managed disk? Yes. The network, it's basically creating a new network for me, which goes by the same resource group name, which is demo-env. So what is going to happen is, guys, when I launch this particular VM, a lot of things will be created. It will create disks, it will create networks, and everything related to it will actually go inside that particular resource group, right? So I'll show you how to do that. Just click on create once you feel everything is right. And now my machine is basically getting created. Okay, so let's wait for a few while. It will take like a minute or so to deploy your machine. So let's wait for that time, and let's hope this deploys soon. So as you can see, it says your deployment is underway. Once it's complete, you will see a different message over here. So let's wait for that message to appear. Alright guys, so my deployment is complete. As you can see, the message is being told over here. So the next thing that I'm gonna do is I'm gonna go to resource groups, and now I can see that I have something called as demo-env. I will go inside that, and over here I have all the related resources to my VM. Okay, so guys, as you can see, my virtual machine is this particular resource. So let me go inside that. And now what I'll have to do is I'll have to select this IP address. This is the IP address on which the instance is available. So let's copy this IP address. And now let's open the putty tool. Now what is the putty tool? We used putty gen before to create the key. Now for connecting to the instance, you will have to use the putty tool. Now how do you download the putty tool? Again, back to your tab where you opened the download web page. Now over here, you will have to select putty.exe. It says the SSH and telnet client itself. You'll have to download this according to your architecture, and then you will have a tool which looks something like this. Now what I want to do is I want to connect to this IP address which I've just copied from the Azure portal, and I will have to go inside SSH and I'll have to go inside auth, and now I will have to select the PPK which will basically be used to connect to my machine, which is Azure-key. Let's click on open. And now everything is ready, guys. So I have selected the PPK, I have inserted the IP address, and now let's click on open. So it will ask, so whenever you connect to a new IP address, it will give you this warning. Don't worry about it. Just click on yes. And now it is asking, what do you want to log in as? So remember, the username that we gave was Azure. So let's select that and hit enter. And that's it. That's about it, guys. So now you're inside your Linux machine, which is the Ubuntu machine, and now you can do anything with it as you feel necessary, right? Now you will ask me one thing that, we deployed we allowed HTTP connection. Why did I do that? Just to show you one very awesome thing. Now, since this is Ubuntu, the commands that I'll be entering now is basically for Ubuntu, and if you want to copy these commands, you will also have to install or you will have to launch Ubuntu OS. Right? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to make this server as a web server. So in order to do that, I'll pass on the commands sudo apt-get. So let's update this machine first. Sudo apt-get update, and this will now update the machine. Alright, so my machine is now updated. Now let's go ahead and install Apache. So sudo apt-get install Apache 2. So guys, what is Apache? Apache is basically a software for web server, and what is right now happening is it is being installed on my Ubuntu machine. Once it gets installed on my Ubuntu machine, all I have to do is I'll have to go to the IP address of my VM instance, and then I will be able to see a web page over there, right? So it's almost complete, guys. So let's wait for this to complete and then we'll move forward. Alright, so my Apache has now been successfully installed, and now if I go back to my machine or my portal, my Azure portal, I'll just copy this IP address, and now let's paste it in a new tab and hit enter. Can you see? This is basically a website which has been created by Apache 2. It's basically a default page which you see when you have installed Apache 2. But nevertheless, guys, if you guys go to this IP address, given that I would not shut off this machine, you will be also able to see this particular page, which is basically the Apache 2 Ubuntu default page. Now what I can do is I can also go ahead and edit this web page, right? So let's go ahead and go to the location where this web page is basically stored. So it's stored inside var www.html, and this is the index.html file which is being shown over here. So what I'll do is I'll just change the name of this index.html file to, let's say, 1.html file, and I'll have to give sudo in order to do that. And now let's create one more index.html, and let's say this is a HTML page whose title would be demo website, right? And the body of this would basically have a heading which would go like, welcome to Intellipaat's Azure. Okay, so this is what I specify. I close the headers, and I'll close the body, and I'll close the HTML as well. Okay, so I've closed the HTML, I've closed the body, I've given the H1, I've given the title as demo website. Let's save it. And if I do an ls now, I can see that there is an index.html present. Now if I do a refresh, you can see I'm getting this: welcome to Intellipaat Azure training, and the title of my page is demo website. Right now, you would have also noticed I made the Apache page as 1.html. So if I go to 1.html, this is the Ubuntu default page. And if I simply go on the IP address, it will open index.html, which is basically this. So guys, we have successfully deployed our Linux VM on Azure, and we have successfully hosted a website also on this particular server. Now guys, remember that this is infrastructure as a service. Now what I've done is I had the access to the operating system. I basically installed Apache 2, and then I put a website over there in that particular folder, which is var www.html, and then I got the website, right? So this is infrastructure as a service. You're getting the whole operating system and you can do anything with it. I can also install MySQL on it, and I can configure my website to basically talk to the MySQL server, right? I can do anything with this server. Now, when you compare it with app services, which we saw earlier, that app services are basically platform as a service or function as a service. Functions app is also a platform as a service. Now, how is it different? From the hands-on point of view, you will basically not be using putty. You will basically just deploy that app, that is the web app, and you will get a URL instead of an IP address. You will get a URL, and if you go to that URL, you will see a default page. So let's say you saw a default page when we installed Apache 2. You will see a default page from Azure when you go to that link, that this is a default page for the web app that you have deployed. Right? And if you find the dashboard, you will see a button called upload. And what you can do is, like I created this index.html file, you can also create yours, and you'll just have to upload it. Now, Azure will take care where that file has to go inside the file system, right? And it will take care that on the link, when you go now, you will see your website. It will take care whether what software it has to install, whether it wants to install Apache 2, which is basically the web server, or there are several other web servers as well. You have Nginx, you have Tomcat. So anything that you want or anything which is configured in Azure would be automatically installed, and all you will get is a button which will ask you to upload the website. So you would not get direct access to the operating system, and hence it is called platform as a service. Similarly, with Functions app, in app services, basically you can deploy applications. In Function app, you cannot deploy application. It is simply a place where you just put your code and that code will be run, right? So if in short, I'll have to tell you what Functions app is. It basically does processing. Okay, guys. So guys, this was our demo. This was the first demo as to how you can launch virtual machines on Azure. Now let's go ahead to our next topic. Alright guys, so next in our list are the networking services of Azure. So let's go ahead and start with them. So guys, basically there are 5 core services in networking that you should know of. The first one being the very important one, which is virtual networks. Now what are virtual networks? Virtual networks are basically isolated environments or isolated networks on the Azure infrastructure for whatever machines or whatever VMs that you launch in Azure, and if you want them to talk to each other. For example, I deployed an application where probably I would have a database, I would have a backend server, I would have a front-end server. Now all these servers have to interact with each other so that the whole application can basically function. Now how can they interact with each other? They can interact with each other only when they are on one network, right? So that is very important. Otherwise, they will have to interact with each other over the internet, but that is not a secure thing to do, right? A secure thing to do is when instances or when servers interact on their own private network, which is basically not accessible to the outside world. It is only accessible to the administrator who has possibly launched those instances. So in those cases, we need virtual networks. And also one more thing, that when you're using virtual networks, or if you're using private networks in Azure, you basically get a bandwidth of around 1 GB per second, right? That is the kind of bandwidth that you get when you are dealing with instances which are in the same network, that is in the same virtual network. But if instances have to interact over the internet, obviously the bandwidth will go down, and at the same time it is not secure, right? So whenever you want to launch any resource in Azure, which basically can be launched inside a network, they are launched inside a virtual network. And you do not have the option of launching an instance or a server without a virtual network. You have to launch it inside a virtual network. Now that if you don't want to use it and want to have instances talk over the internet, that is your choice. But Azure does not give you an option of deploying an instance without it being a part of a virtual network. All right. So guys, this is a virtual network. Moving forward, now let's talk about load balancers. Now, what are load balancers? Now, this is a very important service. Reason being, when you deploy your application on cloud, one of the most popular reasons of deploying applications on Azure is because you can get high availability, which basically means you can launch your application on multiple servers, so that even if one server fails, the other server can basically be their replica and they can serve the application, right? So this results in a high availability of your application. Now, what is a load balancer? A load balancer basically sits in front of multiple virtual machines which have the same application running on them, right? And it sits in front of it. Now, obviously, if you are a customer, you do not realize whether an application has been made redundant on multiple servers, right? If you go to facebook.com or if you go to Intellipaat.com, you wouldn't realize how many servers are actually working in the backend. So how is it possible, right? You have to know, basically servers, they have IP addresses, right? So you as a customer should know which IP address you should ping. But all you do is you go to a particular domain, let's say Intellipaat.com, and you get the website. So how is it actually working? So basically the way it works is that load balancer has its own IP address or domain name. And what the load balancer does is it basically randomly spreads the request out to the n number of servers it has. Let's say my Intellipaat website resides on 5 servers, wherein one is the primary server and 4 are the redundant servers, but all these 5 servers are basically serving my website. Now, when a customer comes onto Intellipaat.com, his request is processed in this fashion, that whenever he comes to Intellipaat.com, basically he is routed to the load balancer's domain name or IP address. And once a request reaches the load balancer sees which server basically has less load, right? And the server which has less load, it sends the request to it, right? Now, load balancer is also an important concept. You must have heard about auto scaling, right? Or if you talk it in terms of Azure, it's basically called VM scale sets. So what happens in that particular scenario is we specify a threshold limit. We specify that whenever the CPU usage goes beyond 80% of the aggregate number of servers, let's say there are 4 servers and the average CPU load on all these 4 servers has gone beyond 80%, right? So what happens in that case? It will basically launch a new instance. Now, when it launches a new server with the same application, your load balancer should also route traffic to it. And that is when load balancer plays a key role. It plays a key role when you're doing auto scaling, and at the same time it plays a key role when you have multiple servers which are basically serving the same application and you want to equally divide the traffic coming onto your servers, or basically coming onto your load balancer on your servers, right? So this is what a load balancer is, as the name suggests, right? But the load balancer in its most basic sense, it basically does it randomly, right? It randomly equally distributes the traffic among all the servers. It does not follow any protocol or rule as in how it has to basically divide the traffic, right? So this kind of process or this kind of procedure, when it is followed, it is basically called a round robin fashion of distributing traffic, right? The next kind of load balancer is the application gateway load balancer. Now, what is application gateway load balancer? The application gateway load balancer basically works a little different from the normal load balancer that we discussed earlier. So in the application gateway load balancer, basically the load is distributed based on rules. Now, what are those rules? Those rules are basically paths. Now, for example, if I go to intellipaat.com/blog, right, what will happen? I get to see the blogging website. And if I go to intellipaat.com/all courses, I basically see all the courses which are there on the website. Now, how does that work? Now, if you are from an IT background, if you understand how servers work, you might say that there must be two folders inside the root document of the server, wherein inside the all course folder you have the code for displaying all the courses, and inside the blog folder you have the code for showing all the blogs. But that is not actually how it works. Right, so basically, if I were to talk about our infrastructure, the Intellipaat's infrastructure, we have a separate server for blogs and we have a separate server for all the courses that we have. Right now, the load balancer that we use is an application gateway load balancer. It's kind of like that. So basically, what happens is whenever it sees that in the URL there's a path which says /blog, it basically routes the traffic onto the blogging server. And whenever it sees that the path is /all courses, it routes the traffic to my courses server. So this is how it works. This is called path-based routing, and basically it works on the layer 7. So if you guys are aware of the OSI model, right? So according to the OSI model, the application gateway load balancer works on layer 7, right? Now, if you are not from CS background, if you didn't understand what I just said, it is okay. So in the most basic sense, what the application the layer 7 that it works on, in the most basic sense, what that means is that application gateway load balancer does path-based routing. Right, whatever path is there in the request, based on that path, it basically routes the request to a particular server. You can also define a default rule in case anything which is there except /blog and /all courses. If there is a default server that you want to send your request to, that is also possible. Like for example, you would have seen that some websites, if the link is not found on that website, they basically route to a 404 page, right? Now, how does a typical 404 page look like, right? If you look a 404 page, it basically says error 404, content not found, right? But some websites, like if you would have visited flipkart.com or amazon.com or even intellipaat.com in that case, if you try to search for something which is not there on the blog, for example, let me just switch to my browser, right? And let us go to, let's say, intellipaat.com and let's say /Azure, right? Now what will happen? It will basically give me a 404 page, and let's see how that looks like. Okay, so there is a /Azure thing. Let me do one thing. Let me type in some gibberish content and let me just search for that. So this should give me a 404. Right, so you can see I've got an oops page which says we were unable to find the page you are looking for. And if I change the content also over here, let's say we enter some random text again, I will again see this page. Can you see? It says page not found. And this is similarly the way it happens for other websites as well. For example, if I go to amazon.in and I again search for something gibberish, let's see what happens. It says 404 document not found, and this is basically a custom page, right? And if I again go to any other gibberish URL, I again get this page. Now, how is that working? So that is working because they also are using an application load balancer, which basically says anything other than the rules that we have specified. If someone goes or tries to go to a particular URL like the one that we have specified, route them to the 404 page, which is this, right? And that's how the application load balancer is bringing you to this particular 404 page. Right? So guys, this was the application gateway. The next service that we have in networking is called the DNS zones. Now, what is DNS zone? Now, any website that you go to, guys, you do not enter the IP address for that website, right? You basically enter a domain name, and that domain name basically gets you to the website, right? You never enter the IP address. So similar is the case with DNS zones as well. So what DNS zones helps you in is basically it helps you to route your domain to the Azure resource where your application basically resides. For example, you go to any domain website and you buy a domain. Let's say you buy a domain which is personalwebsite.xyz. Let's say you buy this domain. Now you want to route whoever is going to this domain, you want to route the traffic to one of the virtual machines that you have launched in your Azure portal. Now, how would you do that? For doing that, you will have to go inside the DNS zones service of Azure, and you basically will get some name servers, right? Those name servers are basically DNS servers that Azure owns, and those DNS servers you would have to specify in your domains. So where you bought your domain, you would basically get a dashboard wherein you can put the DNS servers which the domain that you have bought will ping on, right? For example, whoever would be going to personalwebsite.xyz would basically be routed to those DNS servers that you will be mentioning over there, right? And those DNS servers you get from DNS zones. The next thing that you do is you specify in the DNS zones that whatever traffic is coming from the domain that basically I've specified, route them to this particular VM instance. I'll have to specify that in DNS zone service. And that is how it'll work. So whenever you need a use, or whenever you have a use case like you have the domain with you, or even if you want to buy a domain, you can actually buy the domain at the Azure dashboard as well. But let's say you have the domain itself, right? And you want to point it to any Azure resource which is existing in your dashboard. So the way to do that is going inside DNS zone, right? Our next service, guys, is again a very important service which is called CDN. Now, what is CDN? CDN basically means Content Delivery Network. Now, how does that work? What is a content delivery network? A content delivery network basically improves the time taken to basically serve you a website. For example, if you go to Amazon.com or if you go to Facebook.com, let's say, do you happen to see the speed with which the website loads if you have a good internet connection? It loads very fast, right? Now, where do you think the Facebook website is actually hosted, right? Now, what happens is, now Facebook is a multinational corporation, right? It's a big website which is actually being used by the whole world, right? So they have different data centers across the globe from where the requests are basically served. But let's talk about a smaller scale website. Let's talk about Intellipaat.com, right? We don't serve the whole world. We basically might have around 400 to 500 people at a particular time on our website, right? Now, what happens is we get traffic from across the globe, right? We want everyone to have a speedy experience when it comes to them using our website, right? Now, what are the ways that I can ensure that? Let's say my traffic is coming from US. Right? The traffic that comes from US is like, let's say 60% of my overall traffic. So what I can do is I can set up my data center in the US so that the US people will actually get the website fast, right? But let's say someone is accessing the website from Japan. So in that case, what he will have to do is whenever he goes to Intellipaat.com, the request will basically be sent to the US servers, and from the US servers, the request will come back, and that's when his website will start to load. Right? So this basically increases latency. Latency is basically response time of a particular application. In our case, it's a website Intellipaat.com. Now, if you want to reduce latency, what are the different ways to do that? The different ways to do that is, the first way that you can do it is you can basically open a data center in Japan as well and load all your, scale up the number of servers that you have, and then also put your website over there. And whenever people from Japan will basically be accessing your website, they should be seeing the Japanese version of the website. And the people in the US, they should be seeing the US version of the website. The people in India should be seeing the Indian version of the website, right? That's how it works when you use an e-commerce website like Amazon. So you have Amazon.in, you have Amazon.com. For Australian people, it's Amazon.au. Right? So for different countries, it has the different extension, which basically means that that particular website is being served from their home country's data center, right? But there is another way to basically serve your website faster, and that way is basically called CDN. Now, what is CDN? CDN basically caches all your static data, right? For example, what kind of static data are we talking about? Let's talk about videos. Let's say my Intellipaat website also plays videos in the self-paced courses. Now, if you are a person who is in Japan, and let's say my servers are there in the US, so what will happen is the moment you try to play a video on my website, that video will get downloaded to the nearest location of an Azure data center, right? So while you're watching that video has been downloaded on the data center of the Azure premises in Japan. And what happens in later is basically whenever any other person in Japan would try to access that website, he will get access to it through the Japan server rather than the US server. So what you have done is you have set up your servers in US. You have not set up your servers in Japan, but what you have done is you have basically enabled CDN on your website. And what happens in that case is all the static content is basically loaded onto edge servers of Azure. So whatever servers are used to cache data, cache static data in the CDN services are called the edge servers, right? So whoever is accessing my website from whatever part of the world, if they have a Azure data center near them, my content will basically automatically get downloaded over there. And whenever there is a next person who is trying to access it, that already downloaded data will be served to him directly. And that's how I reduced the latency of my application without setting up servers in different locations for different kind of traffic that I get, right? So this is how it drastically reduces cost because I'm not launching new servers, and at the same time, it serves the purpose of reducing your latency of your application. So this is what CDN profiles is, guide. So guys, these were the core services in networking of Azure, right? Now let's move forward and talk about the next set of services, which are basically the storage services. Alright, so guys, next in our list, we have the storage services of Azure. So let's go ahead and have a look at them. So guys, essentially, there are 6 services that you should know of while you're using Azure in terms of storage. The 6 services are Blob, file storage, tables, queues, data lake storage, and Databox. So let's discuss them one by one. The first one being Blob. Now, what is Blob, guys? Blob basically means binary large objects, right? So if you have binary files and you want to store them on Azure, Blob storage is the answer for you, right? So it can store anything from music files or it can store video files. It can also store text documents. Any kind of file that you want to store on Azure can be stored on Blob. Now, Blob also can be used in conjunction with your websites, and it can basically act as a storage server for you, right? It also enables you to host content which is publicly accessible over a link. It can also host static websites on its storage. So that is what Blob is, guys, right? So most of the time you would see that companies, if they have a website, all its static content is actually picked up from the Blob, right? So this was about the Blob, guys. Our next service is file storage. Now, what is file storage? File storage is basically a shared file storage that can be used with multiple computers. That basically means if I have 5 servers, right, and let's say they need a particular file for their working, and all these 5 servers basically need the same file. So what I can do is I can basically create a drive, or I can create a storage point on file storage, and all these 5 servers can be used to basically mount the file storage drive on them, right? And any change that is done from one server on the central repository of file storage, all those changes would be reflected on all the next 4 servers. The use that I can think of for file storage is, let's say you have an application which writes data onto a particular file, right? And basically this application of yours is spread across multiple servers to ensure it is highly available, right? Let's say you have an application which basically writes data, right? And this application is spread across 5 servers. Now, what happens is we've already discussed the role of a load balancer. You hit the load balancer and you're randomly assigned a server and you work on it. Let's say you worked on server 1. As a customer, you would not know which server you're working on, correct? Let's say you worked on server 1, right? You saved your changes and now those files are now saved on server 1. But the next time you hit the URL, now you are on server 3. if you are on server 3, you would not realize it, but your work, you would expect it to be there on server 3 as well. Now here comes a problem. If there is no central storage for all these 5 servers, they will be asynchronous in nature, in the sense that they will not sync data with each other. Whatever changes are done on the first server, the third server, the fourth server, and the fifth server will be unaware of it, right? And that is when arise the need of a central storage, and that is what file storage is for, right? It basically uses the SMB protocol. So basically SMB 2.1 and 3.0 is compatible with file storage. And recently, even Linux platforms like Ubuntu, CentOS, and even macOS have started supporting SMB, right? So it essentially would recommend you to use SMB 3.0, but there are some OS versions which could have SMB 2.1. For example, if you're using Ubuntu 16 or Ubuntu 14.04, they are basically using SMB 2.1, right? So it has the backward compatibility as well for older OS like Ubuntu 14.04. So if you want to mount drive on Ubuntu, which basically is hosted on Azure file storage, you can do that using the SMB protocol. There are a list of softwares that have to be installed. More on that we can discuss when we study file storage in detail. But for now, because we are in a tutorial session, I just told you what file storage is used for. So if you were to ask, or if you were to think of a use case where you need a central storage kind of a thing, now you know that you have to use Azure file storage. Moving on, guys, our next service is Azure Table. Now Azure Table is basically a NoSQL data store, right? And it can help you to store structured data, right? It basically can store structured data. It has tabular columns and tabular rows in which you can save data, but it is NoSQL in nature, which means the data does not have to be in symmetry, right? Your next data could have 8 columns, the third row could have 2 columns, the fourth row could have just 5 columns. It could take any kind of data, but the only condition is that the data should be structured among columns, right? So if there is any kind of need for storage of data of this kind, you can use Azure Table. Our next kind of storage is Azure Queues, which basically is used with stateless systems, right? Systems which do not know of what all jobs are executing on the counterpart or on the replicated servers of their application. For example, let's say there is an image processing website, and what it does is the moment you upload an image, you can process the process the image according to your need, right? So what happens in this case? Let's say there are 200 people on the website and they have all pressed the process image button together. Now what will happen? There are 200 images that have to be processed, and obviously not all 200 images can be processed at the same time. So what happens is the images are processed one by one, and let's say in the backend server where the processing is done, there are 5 servers who are doing the processing, okay? Now all these 5 servers, they pick up an image at random from the queue. So let's say the queue is first in, first out. Whichever image comes first goes out first as well. So whenever the job of the first server is done, let's say it was doing a processing on an image and the image processing is done, it picks up another image from the queue. The second server would also do the same. The third server would also do the same, right? So what happens is, let's say the first server, it processed image 1. Now the second, third, fourth and fifth server, they would not know whether the first image has been processed or not, and they can process it again. So for those kind of scenarios and for solving those kind of situations, we had queues, which basically streamline all the content which has to be processed, and whichever content is taken up by a particular server, it deletes it from the stack and then puts the second image or the second object which basically has to be processed, right? So for these kind of scenarios, you use Azure Queues. Our next kind of service is data lake storage. Now data lake storage is similar to that of Blob, not a Blob, but tables, Azure Tables. So data lake storage can store data, but it is basically used to store data for big data analytics. It specializes in that particular course segment. So if you have a big data analytic use case and you want to store data for that, data lake storage should be the choice for you. right? So this is about data lake storage, guys. The next service that we have is Azure Data Box. Now, what is Azure Data Box? Now, you might think of your company. Let's say you're working for a company and you have all the servers on premise, right? You have been working since 15-20 years in the sector that you are, I mean your company, and you did not have cloud at that time. And what you have done is you've bought your own servers, you have hosted your own applications, but now the cost incurring for those servers is too high when you compare it with the cost which is there in cloud computing when you opt for cloud computing. So now what I have decided is basically that you want to migrate all your applications to Azure Data Box, okay, or sorry, to Azure. So let's say there's 5 petabytes, or let's say 1,000 terabytes of data that you have to transfer on Azure. Now, in businesses, time is very important, guys. Time is money, basically. You must have heard of that phrase. So everything is required at a fast pace. And if you want to transfer 1,000 terabytes of data, imagine the data transfer costs which would incur to you, and also it would take a lot of time to upload 1,000 terabytes of data via internet to Azure, right? You would agree on that. Now, to solve problems of this scale, when you have a large amount of data that you want to transfer onto Azure cloud, what Azure does is it basically gives you a physical device on which you can load your data, right? So Azure Data Box is a service in which you can basically request a box kind of a system from Azure, which basically ships to your company. You can load all your data onto it, and then that box is again shipped back to Azure cloud, and all your data is again uploaded to Azure cloud from their data center directly, right? So this not only reduces the time taken to transfer data, but it also hugely reduces the cost that you would incur in the internet charges, because 1,000 terabytes is not less data, guys. Now 1,000 terabytes is very less when I talk about a company which is existing since 15 years, and when you talk about multinational corporations, the data can be in petabytes, right? And if you have a petabyte scale data that you want to transfer to Azure, it would take weeks, if not months, to transfer that kind of data. So that is where Databox comes in, and Azure Databox can basically support around 5 petabytes of data at one time. Right now, if 5 petabytes of data is less for you, you can request multiple boxes from Azure too, and multiple boxes will reach your location. You store your data onto it. I mean, you copy your data onto it, and then request Azure back that you can take away your data boxes, and they will take the data boxes back to the data centers and transfer their data directly. Right, this will reduce your time to around 1 week of time. So your data of petabyte scale can be transferred to Azure in less than a week, and at the same time you would also save on huge internet costs, right? So guys, this is what the Data Box service of Azure is. Alright guys, so now let's go ahead and do this hands-on on Azure Blob storage. So let me quickly switch on to my Microsoft Azure portal, which is this. Alright guys, so this is my Microsoft Azure portal. What I want to do is I want to show you guys how the blob storage works in Azure. Right, so the first thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to go into storage accounts, and over here you will find that there is a storage account called demo environment. Why is it here? Because I created virtual machine with the name demo environment, right? And obviously the virtual machine requires some storage. If you go inside this, you will see that you have the 4 options that we discussed, that are blob, files, tables, and queues. What we are interested in is blob, so we'll just click on that. And you can see that this has boot diagnostics for the new VM Linux that we launched earlier, right? So all the logs for that VM are basically going inside this container. So basically, if I go inside this container, you can find that these are the 2 text files which are present. Will have the log data of that VM that we launched. Right, so but we're not here for that. What we basically want to do is I'm going to show you guys how you can use blob. Now, no matter what you are working on, if you want to create a blob storage for yourself, you will have to create a storage account, right? In our case, this was the VM storage account. If you are starting afresh on Azure, you will not have any storage accounts over here, right? So let's create a storage account first, and let's try to name it something relevant, which might go with the demo that we're doing. So the resource group that we want to add it in is demo environment, and the storage account name that we want to give is, let's say, Intellipaat -Azure. Let's say this is the one that we want to give. Okay, where is the location that we want the storage account to be in? As discussed earlier, we'll choose the nearest location to us. So in that case, the nearest location would be Asia Pacific, South India. Let's try to choose this location, right? Now, how do you want the performance? It could be either standard or premium. We can discuss this later, probably when we'll discuss this service in detail in our further sessions. But for now, let's let it be at standard, right? Put everything at default, and now let's click on review plus create. When you do that, it will ask you it'll basically show you all the information with respect to the storage account that we are creating. If everything looks good, just click on create. Once you have clicked on create, guys, your storage account will take some time, and then it'll become ready for use. And like earlier, I specify all you have to do is go to resource groups. Let's say this is the demo environment that we created earlier. I'll go inside this, and now I can see all the things that I had launched are present over here. Even the storage account that I'm creating that is basically being launched right now, I can see that also over here. As you can see, it's Intellipaat Azure. This is the storage account that I created, and now it is visible inside demo environment resource group. On the other hand, if I go to all resources, I'd be able to see all the resources that are there on my Azure account, but this looks a little messy. And that's why resource groups are pretty helpful, guys, because I know that my resource that I've deployed sits inside a specific resource group, and that resource group basically I can name on the basis of what task that particular resource is going to do. Since ours is a demo session, what we have done is all the resources that we are basically deploying are inside the demo environment resource group, right? And right now we just deployed this storage account, which is Intellipaat Azure. And as you can see, it has been successfully deployed. Now let's go inside the storage account. And like we saw earlier, you see a similar user interface over here. You have 4 options, either to go inside Blob or to go inside files or tables or queues. Let me demonstrate to you how blobs work. So we'll go inside blobs, guys. And as you can see, there are no containers over here. What are containers? Containers are nothing but root folders, right? For example, on Windows, you have the desktop folder. So desktop folder becomes the root folder. Or to give you a better example, let's say you go to the C drive of your computer, right? Whatever is inside the C drive is the root of the drive. If you create a folder inside that drive and you then put files inside that folder, that is no longer the root directory, right? So whenever you are uploading files on blobs, the first thing that you need is a root directory, and that root directory is nothing but containers, right? So let's go ahead and create a container. So I click on a new container, and let's name this container, let's say, as Intellipaat. Okay, and now let's click on OK. All right, so my new container is now ready. Now you would have noticed that there is something called as access level, and right now the access level is private. More on this I'll explain to you as we move along. So right now we have not changed it to anything. It's private, and let it be at private. Now what I'll do is I'll go inside this container, and it says no blobs found, right? So what I can do is I can upload some files onto this container, and for doing that I'll have to click on upload, and now I'll have to select the file. So these are some images that I have on this system. So what I'll do is I'll just select a random image, and now let's upload this image onto my blob. All right, so this image is now uploaded on the blob. And what I can do is I can just click on this image, and I can see all the information with respect to it. It's 88 KB in size. This is the last modified time. This is the creation time. Now here is something interesting, guys. I have the URL to the file that I have uploaded, right? Now this URL can be embedded anywhere. It can be embedded on a website. It can be embedded on a post that you're making to social media. This basically is a file which is now hosted on the internet. And anywhere, anyone who has access to this particular link would be able to see the image that you have just uploaded. Awesome, isn't it? Right? So what I'm going to do is let me copy this link and let me open it in a new tab. Right? And I'll hit enter. So right now it says resource not found, the specified resource does not exist. Now, why do you think this happened? This happened because we did not give access to the container for general public use, right? What does that mean? If I click on the container and I click on change access level, it's right now private, which means I can only access this blob through the Azure portal or through CLI or through some other way, but only that way would be working. Now, if I want anyone and anywhere who wants to access this file, I'll have to go ahead and choose anonymous read access for blobs only, right? So when I do that, I've just selected blob over here and I click on OK. Now the permissions for the files inside this container has changed. And what does that mean? That basically means if I refresh this now, I would be able to see this image over here, right? Similarly, if this link is copied by you and pasted on a browser, you also would be able to see this particular image, right? So guys, this is what a blob storage is. You can use blob storage to dump data such as logs, such as images, such as videos. That could be either private if your application does not want to use it and you just want to keep it there for just keeping it there. Or what you can do is you can provide it a public read access on the blob level. That is, for all the files will have public read access, and those files will then be able to use by just going to their link. Let me upload one more file for you guys so that you are clear with the concept of defining permissions. So I've defined the permission on the container, so I don't have to do anything now. I'll just upload the images, and this is a new image which has been uploaded. And now if I go inside the image and I copy the link, and if I paste the link over here, you can see I am able to see the screenshot even here, right? The moment I go out and I change the access level to private and I click on OK. Now if I refresh, okay, so it did not change the permissions of the files, not visible. Okay, so that basically took some time for the permission to get allocated on the container, which basically means like if I go out and if I change the access level again to blob, and if I refresh these files, yes, I'm able to see them, right? And again, if I go out and if I change the access level to, let's say, private again, and if I refresh, the first refresh, it is there. The second refresh, it is there. But if you wait for some time, like a minute or so, this access will basically be gone. As you can see, it now says resource not found, right? So with a click of a button, you can basically control all the files permissions which are there inside a container and grant them public or private read access. Alright guys, so guys, this was a brief demo about blob storage on Azure. Let us come back to our slides. Right, so guys, I hope now you're clear with what blob storage is. Now let's move forward and talk about our next set of services, which are the database and the analytics service in Microsoft Azure. Right, so basically there are 5 core services that you should know of when you're dealing with Azure in terms of database and analytics. So the first service is the SQL database service, which basically is a database as a service, right? You do not get an access to the operating system on which this database is installed. You basically get access to only the database, and basically, if you remember what we have studied earlier, for a service which does not gives you access to the operating system, but in turn gives you access to a platform kind of a thing where you can interact with the service and probably upload something onto the software being used is called platform as a service. So Azure SQL database is basically a platform as a service, which not only gives you the independence from the infrastructure side, but at the same time it is highly scalable and it can provide you up to 212% of return on investment. That means that whatever money you are going to spend on Azure SQL database, the benefits that it is going to provide you is going to give you back 212% of the money that you would be investing in using Azure SQL database. Isn't that interesting, right? So guys, this was the first service among the database analytics services in Azure. Our next service is Cosmos DB. Now guys, Cosmos DB is basically a fully managed database service again, just like SQL Server. But in this case, what happens is your database is extremely highly available, which means it is distributed throughout the world using Azure regions and it is highly available, right? So basically what happens is when you launch a Cosmos DB cluster, it distributes or it creates a replica of the database in multiple regions as you specify, right? And the cool thing about Cosmos DB is whatever region you want to close or want to stop, and probably you do not want your database to be replicated in a particular region, you can do that with the click of a button. If you want it again in some other region, you can again do that with a click of button. So everything is fast, everything is at one, the whole control is at one central place, and you can replicate your database accordingly with that one platform or with that one Cosmos DB dashboard that you get, right? Now again, you have multiple models that you can implement in Cosmos DB. For example, you can implement multi-master replication, or you can implement multi-write regions replication, which basically means usually when you have a distributed database which is highly available, you have one region where all the writes take place, but the read can actually be done from any of the regions where the database has been distributed. But in case of Cosmos DB, you also have the option of configuring multi-write regions, which basically means that let's say I'm in India and I'm a user who's using your application. Right now, if I am using your application, probably the website is being served from the nearest edge location of my location. For example, you must have enabled content delivery network on your website if you want to decrease the latency on your application. Right now, to decrease the latency of your application, you've implemented CDN. So I am being served the website from the nearest location of my home from where I'm accessing your application. And at the same time, the application itself is also accessing the database, right? Now imagine the website is fast, but the processing that it does, that is the data that it has to fetch from a particular database, it exists in altogether a different region, which is on the other part of the world, right? On the other side of the world, right? That will again increase the latency of your application. So you don't only need your front end component to be highly distributed, you also need your backend and your database to be highly distributed and highly available, right? And that is the sole reason when you are dealing with a audience which is spread across the globe, you also have to take care that the processing that each of these guys are doing would also be available to them in the lowest time possible. And for that, what you have to do is the backend processors or the backend servers and the database servers also have to be near them, so that whenever they're writing any information, that also information can be written faster. Now, if you have a write one and read anywhere kind of a distribution, in that case, you'll have to write at a central location. Let's say the central location is the US, and your databases, which are basically the read replicas, are actually distributed throughout the globe. What are read replicas? Read replicas are basically the copy of the central database from which you can read the data. And these read replicas basically get synced or basically are synced with the central database with the So whatever you write on the database is automatically and quickly replicated on the read replicas as well. So it's very fast, right? So in terms of reading the data, you can get a very low latency. But in terms of writing the data, if you want low latency as well, then you need to have multi-write regions. And that is exactly what this feature is for. So in a nutshell, Cosmos DB is basically a fully managed database service which provides you with a large scale deployment of databases throughout the globe, and it also gives you the option of deleting or replicating your database on a new region entirely with a single click of a button, right? So that is what Cosmos DB is for you guys, right? The next set of or the next service that we have is the Data Factory service. Now, what is the Data Factory service? It is basically an ETL service, which is an extract, transform, and load service, which basically can take data from multiple sources and then transform the data according to what has been coded in the application using a particular service, which can be used in conjunction with Data Factory, and then load the resultant data into a BI service which can be used to analyze the data, right? So usually when you're doing this kind of an infra setup, you need a lot of planning, you need a lot of mediators between the technologies which are being integrated. For example, the data can be coming from multiple sources such as social media websites, it can be coming from emails, it can be coming from chats, it can be coming from reviews, it could be coming from anything, right? So all these data sources are basically first of all aggregated, and the data is first put in the raw form in one particular place. Then what happens is, according to the logic that you have specified for the transformation of this data, for example, you probably want to see the data in a particular view. So that basically means you would have to first transform this raw data that you've got from multiple sources into a structured format. So that is what transformation is. So once you have the resultant data that you feel is the correct way of getting the data or representing the data, the next step that you need is, obviously, if there are a million rows in your data set, you won't be able to find what you are actually looking for, or basically it might take a lot of time for you to analyze a million rows of data that you have just created. So what you can do is, or what the industry came up to this particular problem was that they created a business intelligence application. What is a business intelligence application? It takes in the data set and it quickly creates patterns, it quickly creates graphs, which can actually help you to better understand the data, right? So Data Factory also happens to have the integration capabilities with a lot of BI tools. The most prominent one is Microsoft's own Power BI tool, but it also can integrate with Tableau and other BI systems, right? Similarly, it can be integrated with multiple data ingestion systems as well. So it's a total ETL system that you can deploy on Azure and connect your various sources and outputs and get the resultant output. Okay, so guys, this is what Data Factory is. Our next service is Event Hubs. Now, what is Event Hubs? Event Hubs is basically a place where you can again take in a lot of data. Just like Data Factory, you can extract data from multiple sources, but in this case you're not actually extracting data, but the multiple sources from where the data is being generated, the data is being pushed onto Event Hubs. Okay, so the data is pushed onto Event Hubs, and the Event Hubs job is to process this data and see where this data has to go next, right? For example, let's say the data is coming from a social media website, right? So you analyze, okay, so this data came from a social media website, it has to go to this particular service. This data is coming from this particular website, it has to go to X or Y particular service. Similarly, you have millions and millions of data coming every second, or data packets coming every second, and the sole job of Event Hub is to basically analyze each packet and redirect it to the corresponding consumer of that packet, right? So this is what Event Hubs is for you. So this is done very fast. So the speeds claimed by Azure is around 1 Gbps. That is, it can process 1 GB of data per second. So the messages coming to event hubs can be processed that faster, and it also does parallel computing of each data packet, right? So this is how, or this is what event hubs is for, guys. Now obviously event hubs cannot be just used alone, right? You have to use it in conjunction with a host of applications. For example, the producers, that is the data producing resources, have to first combine with an event hub, and then you have to define the rules in event hub as to what data goes where, or what data goes to which consumer, right? And then your consumers are defined on, and they are basically connected to event hubs, right? So basically event hubs in the most basic sense is a singular point of data ingestion. So you don't have to worry about where should I send my data. Send all your data to event hubs, and event hubs will decide where your data packet has to go based on what rule you have defined inside that system. Okay, so guys, this is what event hubs is. Our next service is data lake analytics, right? So we already saw what data lake is. So data lake is basically a storage for big data analytics, right? So data lake analytics is basically a distributed cloud-based data processing infrastructure, right? So it is basically architected to perform data processing on the big data. I mean, the data that you stored on data lake has to be processed by something, right? And that processing can actually be done by data lake analytics. So it is basically, the architecture is based on Yarn. So Yarn is basically a component of the Hadoop ecosystem, and it can also and basically pairs with the Azure Data Lake Store, or where basically we have stored all our data, and can perform the analysis on the scale of big data analysis. That is, big data is huge amount of data with variety of data in it, right? So all the data has mixed and matched fields, right? The data is in the rawest form possible, and the processing can be done only by using selected tools, which can actually make that happen. If you use simple tools, or if you use traditional tools, the time taken by those tools to process this amount of data will be huge, right? And that is why you need Hadoop tools to basically make this process faster. And Azure has used the same technology that Hadoop uses and has made it even faster for you, right? So data lake analytics is used in big data analytics. It will basically used for processing data. And what data? The data which you store on Azure Data Lake Store, right? So this is what data lake analytics is, guys. Moving forward, guys, now let's move on to our next domain, which is the AI and machine learning domain in Azure. Alright, guys, so in Azure, you basically have three core services in the AI and machine learning domain. The three core services are cognitive services, then you have bot services, and then you have the awesome machine learning studio. So let's understand each of these services one by one. The first service is the cognitive services. Now, what are cognitive services? Cognitive services in Azure are basically APIs or SDKs, which have been developed for a developer, which can be integrated in his application. And these APIs and SDKs basically interact with the machine learning models which have been created in Azure, right? So cognitive services would include services like Vision, which basically gives you image processing capabilities. It also has text analytics services, which can basically do natural language processing for you. So all these services in Azure are ready to use. And to use them, you'll have to integrate them with your applications. And those integration can happen with the help of APIs, it can happen with the help of SDKs. And once your application is integrated with these services, you're charged on the basis of the number of requests that you make to these particular services. For example, the Vision service in the cognitive services of Azure is pretty awesome. Any image that you upload, it will tell you each and everything in the image, whatever is present. And how is that possible? Basically, Azure has processed thousands and millions and even billions of images already, right? And they have trained their image processing machine learning model in a way that now it gives accurate results, right? So instead of creating your own machine learning model for image processing, you can actually use the Azure's machine learning model and you can get your work done. So it might have used deep learning, it might have used the only machine learning, we do not know. But the results are very accurate. And if you want to use AI and machine learning capabilities of Azure, so the models which are trained by Azure, if you want to use them directly, you can actually use the cognitive services of Azure, and to integrate them with your applications, you have several APIs and SDKs available to you. So this was about cognitive services, guys. Now, there's a derivative of the cognitive services that Azure has launched, which is basically called the bot service. Now, what is the bot service, guys? The bot service is basically a chatbot which has been developed by Azure, which is totally based on AI, and it basically makes uses of the natural language processing service or the capabilities which are basically there in the cognitive services of Azure. It makes use of that, right? And it is very to the point, and you don't have to train the model to become expert in the conversation that you're having, but it can actually learn from every conversation that you have with the AI chatbot of Azure, and you can actually tweak its settings so that it becomes custom designed for you, so that your customers get the right answer every time they ask a question from the bot service of Azure, right? So in a nutshell, Azure bot service is nothing but a chatbot service. It's a pre-built chatbot service which you can integrate in your application. And this chatbot service has already been trained by Azure, and it gives accurate answers to questions. But obviously, you'll have to tweak it according to your applications. You'll have to do some settings so that it answers the correct way of answering. The answers would be according to you and according to your domain of application. Okay, so guys, this was the bot services. Our next set of service is the machine learning studio. Now, what is the machine learning studio, guys? It's basically a very simplified version of using machine learning. For example, the most simple language that I think for starting off in data science is R, right? So as a beginner, if you start using R or start learning R, you will have to spend some time to first of all understand the syntax, how it works, etc. And then you'll get a hang of how to create models, how to train them, how to test them, etc. Right? What Machine Learning Studio says is you do not have to learn any programming language. It has drag and drop interfaces. So all you have to know is data science, AI or machine learning conceptually. And if you understand, or if you have the principles of the data science concepts understood pretty well, what you can do is you can start off by creating your own machine learning model by just doing drag and drop from the UI of the Azure Machine Learning Studio, and you'll be up and ready with your first model in under 5 minutes. Of course, for a specific set of data set. Obviously, you will not be taking millions or billions lines of data set, otherwise that will take a little more time. But yes, you can create your own machine learning model with Azure Machine Learning Studio without knowing any programming language, right? So that is the power of Machine Learning Studio, and the most coolest feature of it is it has a drag and drop user interface. So everything is drag and drop. You just drag and drop whatever you need, whatever data set you need, whatever algorithm you want to implement, whatever thresholds you want to implement, just drag and drop everything, and it will work like a charm. Okay, so guys, this was the Machine Learning Studio application for you. The next set of services that we're going to discuss, guys, are the identity services in Azure. Alright guys, so now let's go ahead and understand the core Azure services in the identity domain, right? So guys, probably the most important service when you're dealing with identity in Azure is Azure Active Directory. Now, what do you mean by identity? Identity basically means when you want to give a particular person some access to a particular resource that is being used on Azure Cloud, right? So Azure Active Directory is basically a fully managed multi-tenant service from Microsoft that basically offers identity and access to particular users in your organization. Now, if you're acquainted with how a Microsoft Windows server works, you would know that there is a server Active Directory as well, right? There's a Microsoft Server Active Directory as well, in which you can specify for your on-premise applications which users have access to what extent, right? For example, some people can just have read access, or some people can have read and write access, or some people can even have admin access to a particular application, right? And the most important part about Azure Active Directory is that it can integrate with your on-premise server Active Directory and can also authenticate people who are there on the on-premise infrastructure and want to use the on-premise resources or on-premise software can also be authenticated using Azure Active Directory. And if those on-premise users then you want to use resources on Azure, that also will be authenticated using Azure Active Directory, right? Now, how does all this works? So it's a very simple concept, guys. What you can do, you can actually add users in Azure Active Directory, right? Now you can add individual users and you can assign individual roles to each users. For example, if there is a SaaS application which you have deployed on Microsoft Azure, giving access to that particular SaaS application to a particular user would be possible by just adding a user and giving him the access of that SaaS application, right? And you can also do a mass allocation of a particular permission. For example, let's say you want to give administrator privileges to a set of people. Now, how would you give that? So one way is whenever there is a person who comes into a company whom you think can be given admin access, you will add his user and provide him the admin access. Or what you can do is you can actually define a group on which you have specified admin resources or admin privileges, and whoever users will be added to this particular group will get those permissions or will get those privileges automatically, right? So in this case, what you will be doing is whoever is coming into the organization, you're just adding him to the group and the permissions inheritance takes place automatically because that group has been assigned the admin privileges. Similarly, if you want to create some other group, for example, you want to create a group for some SaaS application, you can also do that, right? And this concept is a part of Azure Active Directory. And again, in a nutshell, Azure Active Directory is nothing but it's basically a directory in which you can add users and specify what these users can do on Azure or on-premise software, right? And these users can be managed in two ways, or either you can manage them individually by creating a user time and again, or what you can do is you can add these users to already existing groups that you have created with the respective permissions, and they'll inherit all the properties which have been specified to that group. Okay, so guys, this was the Azure Active Directory and this was about the identity domain in Microsoft Azure. Moving forward, guys, now let's talk about the management tools in Microsoft Azure that are very important for you to know while you're working as an Azure professional. Alright guys, so let's go ahead and understand the management services of Azure. So the first service is Log Analytics, guys. Now what is Log Analytics? So basically the full name of this service is Log Analytics Workspace. Now what you can do with Log Analytics Workspace is you can dump all the logs with respect to what is happening on a particular Azure resource onto this workspace. Now how do you do that? The first thing that you do is you basically go to your management console and you go to Log Analytics Workspace. Over there you will have to create a Log Analytics Workspace and specify the name anything, right? It's pretty straightforward. Once you have specified that, the next step would be to add a data source. So if I were to show you quickly, I can just jump on to my management console. I can go to Log Analytics Workspace, which is somewhere over here. Here it is. Now here's a sample Log Analytics Workspace that I've created. I'll just go inside it, and as you can see, it says connect a data source. So you can basically connect Azure virtual machines over here, or you can specify some other sources if you want to. And you can also specify Azure activity logs to stream over here, right? So this will start accumulating logs in this workspace. Once that is done, we'll have to specify monitoring solutions as to how you want to read the logs and what do you want to do with respect to a particular level of logs. For example, you have info level, you have critical level in logs, right? This basically tells you that a particular command failed or a particular command passed. So if the level the level field of a log, if it, let's say, info, that means it's fine, it can go ahead. But let's say the level field in the log. So what do I mean by level field? A level field is nothing but you can specify in your log notation that whenever there is an error, I would specify a term such as level, okay, and I would specify that is equal to critical. But if things are okay, it's just for a know-how as to which command has been executed and that command executed successfully. In that case, I can specify the level as info. Okay, and then I can specify in my monitoring solution that whatever log comes in, check the level field in that log. And if the level field is critical, you can flag that log basically. So all that can be configured inside the monitoring solution. So if I were to click on view solutions, you can actually check out what all monitoring components you can actually add on your log analytics workspace. So as you can see, you can add Azure Security Center, you can add optimized catalog. So there are a lot of things that you can basically add on to monitor logs, right? You can choose according to your will. It is available in Azure Marketplace. So once you specify the monitoring solution, your log starts to flow in, and in your monitoring solution you have to specify which logs to flag, and that's how it's gonna work, right? So this is the log analytics service in Azure, guys, and it helps you to manage your Azure resources effectively, pinpoint where the problem is occurring, go over there and see the logs, see on which command the problem occurred, fix that problem, and then go ahead with your daily routine. So this is what log analytics is, guys. The next service is cost management and billing. So this is basically a native application of Azure, guys, which helps you to manage your bills in Azure, right? So for a few things which I can tell you on the top of my head, which comes in is that you can manage a budget. You can specify that my Azure budget or my Azure bill should not go over a particular limit. You can specify that, or you can, so when you say it should not go over a particular limit, that means if it goes beyond that, all your Azure services will be stopped. But when you are in a business, you actually don't want that. So this particular limit is called a hard limit. That is, you want to limit it to that particular cost. There is another kind of limit which is called a soft limit, which basically means it will alert you that your budget has been crossed, and you can actually make forecasts also in this particular service based on your usage. Let's say you have used Azure heavily for 5 days, so it gives you a forecast that if you happen to use Azure in this similar fashion, this is what your bill is going to be at the end of the month, right? And then you can actually see what kind of tweaks you can make in your services so that your bill comes down. So all of this is possible in cost management and billing services of Azure. Now this also is under the management domain. Reason being, it helps you in managing your Azure resources in a better fashion. The next service, guys, is a very important service, which is an automation account. Now what is an automation account, guys? It is nothing but it's a way of deploying Azure resources. So how do you deploy Azure resources? So we have seen few of the resources in this session today, wherein we deployed a virtual machine, we deployed a storage account. So all of that was possible one by one. I mean, I had to go manually into that service. I had to click on add, I had to specify a name, and that's how, you know, my resources were deployed. But in automation account, what happens is you can create runbooks. Now, what are runbooks? You basically specify a code wherein you specify all the resources and their names and their configurations that you want to deploy. And then you upload that runbook onto the automation account, and then you run that runbook. Then what it does is it automatically creates the resources for you. You don't have to do anything, just put that runbook over there, click on play button, and it will create all the resources for you with the exact same configurations that you have specified in the code. It is particularly helpful when you're setting up a large infrastructure wherein you'll have to deploy thousands or 2,000 machines, where each where the 2000 machines are basically divided into multiple sets. It could be backend server set, it could be database server set, it could be front end server set, all of which will have different kind of configurations. And if this is the kind of a scenario, then runbooks would be of great help. And that's where automation account also comes in, which basically helps you to play those runbooks. Okay. Our next service is Metrics, guys. Now, Metrics is a service which helps you to visualize what all is happening on your Azure resource. For example, what is the network throughput? What is the CPU usage, right? What is the memory usage? All of that you can see inside Metrics. Now, you can actually check a 24-hour log as well in Metrics and see at what point of time does your resource or the particular metric that you're checking, could be CPU usage, could be memory usage, is actually rising. And then you can plan accordingly as to how to plan how to scale your infrastructure at that particular time, right? So this is what metrics are useful for. It basically gives you an overview of how things are going. So if you think about it, it is nothing but metrics, it is nothing but logs, which is basically getting visualized in form of graphs. But nonetheless, it's very helpful, and that is a service which is being provided to you by Azure by the name Metrics. Alright guys, so these were all the services in the management domain, guys. Our next up, we'll be discussing a hands-on. So enough of theory, I guess. We have discussed probably most of the important services which are there in the Azure portal. Now what we'll be doing is I will be showing you an application which basically exists on my local host, and what we'll try to do is we'll try to migrate that to Azure, and we'll choose the services based on the knowledge that we have gained today. We'll choose the services accordingly. Then we'll set up the infrastructure, and then we'll see how it works on the cloud. So guys, let's go ahead and do that. Alright guys, so let's go ahead and let me show you what all we are going to do. So the first thing that we're going to do is basically I have a website that I've already created on my local host, which basically can upload data to Azure Blob storage through the website. So I'm going to show you guys how I have configured it and how can it basically upload data to Azure Blob, right? So the second point is create a new container and upload files to this container from the website, right? So we'll be creating a container, and our website we're going to configure to upload files to this particular container. Third thing is we have to create a MySQL database on Azure. So right now what is happening is my website is basically storing data on the localhost MySQL engine. What the hands-on expects us to do is we'll have to deploy MySQL database on Azure, and the website should basically push the data onto the MySQL database, which will be there on the Azure portal, right? So this is the third step. And the fourth step, finally, we want our final website to be uploaded on Azure web app, and basically we have to deploy it using the local git method. What it is, don't worry about it. As you move along, you'll get it. All right, so let's start off with the first point right now, which is demonstrate the website on the local host. So let me switch on to my browser. So guys, this is my Azure portal, and if I have to demonstrate to you my website, it basically exists on localhost Azure 1, right? So this is my website, guys, and what it does is it basically can upload data onto Microsoft Azure. But right now, what I have not basically configured it to connect to my Microsoft Azure storage account. I'll show you how we can configure it, right? So once a file is uploaded on the Blob, it also makes an entry of it in the database, right? Now, where is the database? The database exists on my local host. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to just open the MySQL console, right? And my MySQL console basically has a database called images. So if I do a show databases, you can see that there is an images database. So this is the database that my website will be interacting to. So let me just use images, and in this database what I have is a table. So if I do a show tables command, you can see that I have a table called names, right? But right now there is no data inside names. So if I do a select star from names, as you can see, it is empty set, right? So when this website will be uploading file, when it will be successfully uploaded, the next step would be to basically put the data inside the database as to what is the name of the file. Okay, so let me show you the code, guys. Let me show you how the code looks like. This is my index.php. Let me just open it. Alright, guys. So guys, this is how my code looks like. So the first thing that I'll have to do is basically I will have to enter a deployment key over here, which will basically be my connection string. And the second thing that I'll have to do is I'll have to enter the container name, which I'm going to create in a little while, right? So let's first jump on to our Azure portal, and what we want to do is go inside our storage account. So guys, this is my storage account, and what I want is the deployment key. So in the storage account, you will have to go to access keys, just go inside that. And here you will find two keys. You can take any of these two keys. So what I'll do is let's say I take key 1, and this is the connection string. So I'll have to copy this, and I'll have to come back to my code, and I'll have to replace it over here. So let's replace the deployment key. And now I will have to remove this part out of the deployment key. This is not required, right? So this we will remove, and this is my deployment key, guys. All right. Next step is to basically enter the container name. Now the hands-on basically expects us to create a new container. So let us do that. So let's go inside overview, and let's go to blobs. So I have a container in Intellipaat over here. Let's create one more container, and let's call it new, right? And let's give the access as blob, and let's click on OK. All right, so my container is now ready, and it's called new. Let's name the container over here. So my container name is new. Okay, everything else looks good. So right now this is basically the connection information for my MySQL database. So right now it is going to upload the data onto my local host MySQL. All right, so let's see if I can upload a file now. Let's save this index.php. Let's come back to our website. Let's refresh it once, and now let's choose a file which we want to upload. Let's go inside. Let us try to upload, let's say, database. So this is an image which is called database. Let's select this, and let's click on submit. So it says blob uploaded successfully, and new record created successfully. So let us verify that in our database. So I'll do a select star from names. As you can see, there is a new entry over here, which is 680345573. This is the name which has been assigned by my website. So this is basically a random name. The reason for that is that it could be that you are uploading duplicate files, and if you upload duplicate files, you don't want the names to coincide. So what I'm doing is I'm assigning a random name to every file that I'm uploading, right? So this is the file which has been uploaded, and we can check it over here. If I click on checklist, this is the file which has been uploaded, and if I click on this file now, I can download that file basically from Azure. It says blob not found, and the reason for that is that I'll have to change the URL inside my list website, which is basically if I click on checklist, this is the list.php. I'll have to change some code here. I'll show you that. But first, let's go inside the new container, and as you can see, there's a PNG file over here. Now this PNG file I can directly download from my list file, but in order to do that, what I'll have to do is I'll have to click on this file, and I'll have to copy this URL, and I'll have to see what is the prefix over here. So the prefix is this. So I'll have to copy this prefix, and now I will have to go inside my code and open the list.php code, and this is the URL that I'll have to replace. So let's replace it. All right, great. Now let's save it. Come back to our website. This is the list.php. Let us refresh this once, and now when I click on the file, you can see that I've downloaded the file automatically. Let's click on this file, and this is an image which has been downloaded. Now let's try something else. Let me show you the image first and then I'll try to upload it. So what I'll do is I'll go inside downloads and let's say I want to upload this machine file. So this machine file looks something like this. Okay. Now we're going to upload this machine file. Let's go inside our website. Let's choose a file and now let's select the machine file, which is basically this. This we will upload. We'll click on open and we'll click on submit. So it says Blob uploaded successfully. If I go inside my container and I refresh it, you can see there's a new entry over here. Even in my database, if I refresh, there's a new entry over here. And now what I can do is I can basically just go to my list, refresh it. This is the new entry. Click on it, file gets downloaded, click here, and this is the file which was uploaded. So what is basically happening over here is this file is now hosted on Blob, and any of you, if you click on this link, you will be able to download it. But the problem is that this website right now is only available on my local host, and I have to make it available to the world. Now how can I do that? So first thing first, let us go back to our slides and see what is our next step. So our next step is that I want to create a MySQL database on Azure. So right now my database which is being updated is on my local host. But what I want is that it should be updated on my Azure MySQL database. Now let's see how we can do that. So the first thing that I will do is I'll have to go back to my Azure dashboard. I'll have to go to services and I'll have to go into databases. And this is the database that I want to launch, Azure database for MySQL Server. Let's select it. Let's add a database. I want to include it inside my demo environment resource group. The server name, let's specify it as Intel1, right? The admin username, let's specify it as Intel. The password, let's specify it as Intel@123. Okay, it says your password cannot contain all or part of the login name. No issues. Let's name it as Azure@123. Same is the case over here. Alright. And where do I want to launch it? I want to launch it in South India. The version is 5.7, which is great. Now let's change the amount of specification that we have for this server. Let's click on configure server. I want a basic configuration. I basically want one core and I want the least amount of storage, which is 5 GB. Auto growth, no, I don't want it. Backup retention period, the least is 7 days, which is fine. And I think that's it. Let's click on OK. Now the server has been configured. Now let's click on review plus create. Okay, so our username is Intel, my password is Azure@123, and now let's click on create. Alright, so my deployment is underway, which basically means my MySQL database is now getting deployed. Let's wait for some time. We'll wait for it to be complete and then we'll proceed with our demo. Alright guys, so my deployment is now complete. So I can just click on go to resource and I am in. So this is my database guys. Now in order to see or in order to access my database, this is the server name that I'll have to use. So let's go ahead and select this. So my server name is this. Let's copy it and let's come back to our command prompt. And what we want to do is MySQL -h. This is the connection string or the server name. Next thing is I'll have to specify the username, which in my case is this. So let's copy it, paste it here. Next thing that I want is the password. So the password is Azure@123. Now this will give me an error guys. It says client with IP address is not allowed to connect to this MySQL server. So let's solve that. So we'll go inside connection security. And what I want to do is I will specify my client IP, which is this. Alright, that's been added. Also guys, turn this enforce SSL connection off, because right now we don't want to get into making an SSL connection since this is a demo. Alright guys, everything looks good now. Let's click on save. And once this rule has been saved, what we'll see is that we should be able to connect to our database. Alright guys, so it says it has successfully updated the connection security And now when I go back to my command prompt and I try to enter the same command with the password Azure@123, you can see I have successfully connected to my MySQL database on Azure. Now if I do a show databases right now, you can see there are only the default databases present. So let us change that. So I'll just exit, or before exiting, let us just create an empty database, which is images. So we'll use images and let's create a table. So create table names, and the names will be name space varchar 20. So we have created it, and now let's just go to our code. So the code is over here. This is my code, guys. Now I will have to specify the server name. So server name in my case would be this. Let's copy it. This is my server name. My username is this, and my password is Azure@123. Okay, everything looks good. Let's save the file. Similarly, in index.php, let's do the same changes. My server name is this. Let's copy it. My username is this. Let's copy it, and my password is Azure@123. All right, let's save the file, and now let's go to our website. Let's try to check the list. Let's see what it shows us. It shows us empty because there's no data in the Azure SQL table. Great. Now let's choose a file, and now let's try to upload some random file. Let's click on submit. It says Blob updated successfully, new record created successfully. Let's check that. So I'll just do a select star from names, and I can see that there is a new entry over here. If I do a checklist, this is the new entry. If I click on this, I can download the file, and this is the file that I basically uploaded. Great. Now my website is updating data onto Azure database, and at the same time it is uploading data onto my storage account inside the container, which is new, right? So let's go inside blobs, let's go inside new, and this is the new file which was basically just uploaded. Great, guys. Now what I want to do is I want to make this website public, right? This website is working fine over here, but I want this website to be used by everyone in the world. Now how can I do that? In order to do that, I will have to go on to home, and we studied, or we saw a service which can basically just upload our website and not ask us to install any software. It will not ask us to log in into the operating system, do some configuration, nothing. It will just give us a dashboard through which we can upload our website. So let's go ahead and do that. So the service that I'm talking about is app services. So let's go inside app services and let's click on add. So now it will ask me which resource group. So I'll say demo environment. Name of the instance, let's specify it as Intel demo. All right. Okay, it's already been taken. So let's specify Intel Azure. All right, this seems to be available. What do you want to publish? I want to publish the code, the runtime stack. It's actually PHP 5.6. This is the one. What is the region that we want to deploy it in? We want to deploy it in South India. So let's select that. South India, this is the one. Great. Let's change the size of the server which will be launched. So basically we are in dev or test environment, right? And this is the minimum configurations that we can launch. All right, let's click on apply, and now let's click on review and create. So this over here, we can basically do all the necessary review as to what all we are launching. So we just selected PHP 5.6 and we specified the name of the app. That's all we did, right? Now let's click on create. Now guys, what will happen now is it will basically deploy a server on which it will install PHP 5.6, it will install Apache, and then it will give me a URL. And when I go to that URL, I will basically see a sample app, right? It is not giving me access to the operating system. It is not asking me to install any software. All that was done over here was we selected the runtime stack, which was PHP 5.6. We specified the server configuration, and that is all. That is all we need to configure, and that is all we get access to. Now, once it gets deployed, I'll show you guys how you can upload your code onto this particular web app. So as you can see, it is already deployed. Now let's go to resource, and this is a resource, guys. The status is it's running right now. And if I browse this web app right now, it'll basically show me a sample web app which has been deployed on it, right? Let's wait for that website to appear. Since this web app has just been launched, it might take some time for the web app to show the website, but nevertheless, it will show the website. So let's wait for it to actually show us. Let me try stopping it and refreshing it once. All right, it's going to take its sweet time, so let's give it that. All right, so as you can see, hey app service developers, your app service is up and running. Time to take the next step and deploy your code. Great, so this is what you want to do. Now, to deploy your code, you will have to go inside Deployment Center. So let's go inside that. So once we are inside Deployment Center, it's asking me where is my source control, right? So my source control is basically on my local, right? So, but my local is not a Git repository as of now. So what I can do is I can just go on my code, which is over here, Azure 1. This is the folder, and let me just right click here and click on Git Bash, right? Let me just make the text a little bigger for you so that it is visible. All right, so guys, now what I'm going to do is I'm going to initialize an empty Git repository, so git init. And now I'm going to add all the files in the Git file system. I'm going to stage it for the Git file system. So once this process is done, I'm going to commit it, git commit -m, and this is my first commit. Now it's going to save the files. Great, so the files are saved. Now what I want to do is I want to upload this particular code onto my Azure web app, right? So going back to the portal, I do have a local Git where I have my code checked in. So let's select this option and click on continue. Now it's asking me which build provider to choose. Don't worry about here. Don't worry about what is Azure Pipelines and what is Kudu engine. Basically, if you select Kudu engine, you don't have to do any configuration. More on this we can discuss in the further sessions, but right now just select the Kudu engine and click on continue. And now it says your local Git repository URL will be generated upon completion. Branch would be master, app service is build service. Great, let's click on finish. So now it is basically going to set up the Git environment for me on the web app server, and what I will get is basically this URL, which is my Git URL. So this URL I'll be using to upload my code. But before that, I will also have to set the credentials for my Git system. So to set that, I click over here, FTP or credentials, and I'll go to user credentials, and I can specify anything over here. Let's specify a username. Let's say the username is Intellipaat, and let's say the password is Intelli@123, Intelli@123, and now let's click on save credentials. So it says saving credentials was a success. Great. Now what I can do is I can just close this, and now I'll just have to go to my resource. I'll have to go to deployment center, and now I will just take the Git URL over here. Alright, so this is a Git URL. Let's copy this, and now git remote add Azure, and let's try to paste this link now. Yes, so this was the syntax, git remote add Azure, right? And now what I want to do is I want to push my code onto Azure. So git push Azure master. I'll hit enter, and it'll ask me the credentials. So credentials is Intellipaat, and the password is Intel@123. Oh, authentication failed. I think I forgot the password. No issues, guys. So I can just specify it again. So it's Intel@123 and Intel@123. Let's save the credentials. Okay, credentials are saved. Let's go back here, git push Azure master, and now it should basically push my code onto the web app. Now it will take some time over here, guys. Don't worry about the time. It'll take around a minute or so to upload your code. So let's wait for that time and let's hope everything goes well. Alright, the process has started. So it is updating the branch now, copying all the files. Great. So my code is now uploaded on the app and it says it will restart in 10 seconds. Great. So meanwhile, what I can do is I can go to my web app and I can just refresh this. And as you can see, my website is now available over here. Alright, if I click on checklist, you will see an error. And I'll tell you why that error would be there. It says connection failed. Client with IP address is not allowed to connect to this MySQL server. Now, how can you solve that? Just go to home and go to your database. Go to connection security and allow access to Azure services. Just click on. And as a security feature, just remove the IP address that you used earlier. And now let's click on save. So now my security settings will get updated. And then I would be able to use my website on the web app. Alright, so my settings are about to be updated. Let's wait for that time and then we'll go ahead. Alright guys, so my data has been updated successfully. So if I go here back and I click on refresh, you can see the list is now being generated. Let's try to upload a file, guys. Let's try to upload this Word file. Okay, let's click on open and let's click on submit. It says Blob updated successfully. Let's check that. Let's go to our resource group. Let's go to our storage account. Let's go inside blobs. We'll go inside our container. And this is the docx file which was just updated. And if I refresh the list, I can see the docx file over here as well. If I click on it, I'll be able to download it. And guys, with this, we have successfully completed our demo. But let me show you a very awesome thing that comes with connecting Git to your web app, right? So now I can just simply go to my index.php and let's say I want to change this heading. Okay, so let's try to change the heading. I'll just go down, upload to Azure Blob, and let's add a little bit of text over here. Let's say welcome to Intellipaat. Okay, let's save it, come back to our Git terminal. Let's do a Git status. You can see that index.php has been modified. Great. Let's save this file. Let's commit this file, updated index. Great. And now let's push it. So git push Azure master. It'll again take a minute or two and then our files will get updated on the web app automatically. Alright, so my code has been updated. Let's go ahead and check it. So let me just refresh this website. And as you can see, my code has successfully updated over here. It says upload to Azure Blob, welcome to Intellipaat. And this is exactly what we changed. Alright, so guys, with this we have successfully completed our demo. Let's summarize what all we did. So let me come back to my slides. So we demonstrated the website on the local host, which was working fine. Then we created a new container and then we uploaded all the blob files over there. After that, we also deployed a MySQL database on Azure, and the localhost website was then able to insert data onto the MySQL database on Azure. And then finally, we also deployed an Azure web app, and we deployed our website using the local git method. And finally, we also checked if we updated anything and we pushed through our git method. The files were successfully being uploaded onto my Azure web app, right? So with this, guys, we have successfully completed our demo. Our next topic is basically quiz. So let's go ahead and see some of the questions that we can answer after attending this session. Alright guys, so our first question is, which of the following is not a platform as a service? And the options are MySQL database for Azure, app service, Azure VMs, or is the answer none of these? Okay, so if you want, you can pause the video and think about it. So did you guess the answer? So yes, the answer is Azure VMs. The next question is, can we deploy a Azure VM without a virtual network? So the options are yes, no, or none of these. So what do you think? So yes, you guessed it right. The answer is no, right? Let's now move on to our third question, which is, what is Azure Active Directory used for? Is it A, monitoring, B. Identity management, C. Automation, or D. None of these? Now guys, I will not give you the answer for this particular question, so you'll have to answer it to me in the comment section below, alright?
Let us first understand what exactly is an Azure certification. So this certification is a level of Microsoft Azure cloud expertise that an IT professional obtains after passing one or more exams that Microsoft offers. Basically, it is to demonstrate and validate the technical cloud knowledge and skills one has obtained. Now, what are those certifications? That we shall discuss as we move forward. Here, I'm going to discuss some of the major Azure certifications, and after that, we will quickly discuss about them. Now, moving forward, first one is Microsoft Certified Azure Administrator Associate, that is AZ-103. Next one, the Azure Developer Associate, that is AZ-203. Third one, the Microsoft Certified Azure Solutions Architect, that comes under the expert level, that is AZ-300 and 301. Last one is the Data Lake and Data Factory. So it is usually to perform big data engineering on Microsoft Cloud services and commonly known as 70776. Now let's have a quick glance at these certifications. So now for the AZ-103 certification, this falls under the associate level. With this certification, Microsoft aims to help the candidates learn and acquire a wide range of skills that are required to be a cloud administrator, such as managing various cloud services, security, networking, storage, and many more. Previously, a candidate had to pass AZ-100 and AZ-101 certification exams in order to achieve this certification. But after receiving constant feedbacks from learners about the exam being difficult and with too much syllabus, Microsoft Learning decided to merge these two certification exams and name it as AZ-103 certification exam, with 70% of the syllabus from AZ-100 and 30% of the syllabus from AZ-101 exam. Next we have the AZ-203. So guys, this is another associate level role-based certification exam by Microsoft Azure. With this certification, Microsoft aims to help the candidates learn all the skills required in the development domains such as designing and building cloud applications, services, and many more. Before AZ-203 certification exam was introduced, AZ-200 and 201 were in the picture in order to get certified as an Azure Associate Developer. But both of these exams got retired and AZ-203 took their place. Right. Again, after receiving constant feedback from learners about the exam being difficult and with too much syllabus, Microsoft Learning decided to take the similar step for this certification exam as well, and the AZ-203 exam came into the picture. And this exam pulls in approximately 70% of its objectives from the AZ-200 exam and approximately 30% of its objectives from the AZ-201 exam. Now moving forward to the another exam, that is the AZ-300 and 301 exam. This is the first role-based certification exam that is launched at the expert level. With this certification, Microsoft aims to help the candidates learn the most advanced Azure skills along with learning to design a secure, reliable and scalable solution for businesses. After this certification, a candidate is expected to have gained expertise in computer, networking, security and storage. Even though the certification also covers the skills of the Azure Administrator and Azure Developer Associate level certifications, but they are not a mandatory prerequisite for the certification. In order to achieve this certification, you will have to pass the following exams, which are AZ-300, that is Microsoft Azure Architect Technologies, and AZ-301, that is Microsoft Azure Architect Design. So again, these two above exams are the replacement for the old 70535 exam, that is Architecting Microsoft Azure Solutions. Now moving forward, that is the 70776 certification exam. So this certification requires candidates to get accustomed with implementing big data engineering on Azure. So the learners must have skills on Microsoft Azure SQL Data Warehouse, Azure Data Lake Analytics, Azure Data Factory, and Azure Stream Analytics, and subsequently perform big data best practices using the same. As informed by the Microsoft Learning, the certification named 70776 is about to be expired and no replacement exam name is being given to it yet. However, the replacement exam would consist of all the topics from the current curriculum with a few topics removed or merged with a different topic. Right. So let's move forward. Now let's move forward. So guys, there is a huge amount of vagueness when it comes to choosing who should go for which certification, right? So moving forward with the video, let us discuss which certification is for whom. So for AZ-103 exam, candidate taking this exam are expected to have sufficient knowledge of various services across full IT lifecycle, applications and their environments. At least 1 year of experience in an IT administration and an hands-on with server provisioning, monitoring, resource management is recommended. Now for AZ203 exam, in order to pass this exam, the candidate must have at least 1 year of experience of developing scalable solutions indulging in all phases of software development. And the candidate must be skilled in at least one cloud supported programming language. So this exam requires a candidate to be proficient in software development phases such as solution designing, development, deployment, testing and maintenance. Now we have AZ300 and 301 exam. If we first talk about AZ300 exam, then a candidate must have expert level skills in at least one of the expert level domains. This exam requires a candidate to have sound knowledge of various concepts in IT operations such as networking, virtualization, business continuity, data management and disaster recovery. And for AZ301, in order to pass this exam, the candidate must be skilled in Azure administration and Azure development. So skills in DevOps are also recommended. So the candidates taking this exam are expected to be able to build Azure solutions according to the business requirements, such as making decisions that help the business become secure, solutions making the business more scalable. Now moving forward to 70776. So this certification is for the candidates who design analytic solutions and build operationalized solutions on Azure. Candidates who are familiar with the features and capabilities of batch data processing, real-time processing and operationalization technologies. And of course, the data engineers. Now let's move forward. So guys, in order to be well prepared for Azure certification exams, you must know what are the objectives of the exam, right? So following the same order as before, let us first discuss the curriculum for AZ103 exam. Due to constant feedbacks about the exam being difficult, Microsoft has divided the entire exam syllabus into 5 modules. So in order to ease the exam preparation, let us discuss each of these modules below. Manage Azure subscriptions and resources. So guys, this percentage figure that you see here basically indicates the relative weightage of the questions from each of the modules. If the percentage is higher, then you should expect more questions from that module and vice versa. So in this module, you need to be thoroughly prepared with the managing Azure subscriptions, resource groups, analyzing resource utilization and consumption, and managing role-based access control, that is RBAC. Second, we have implement and manage storage, where it holds a weightage of 15 to 20% in the exam, covering the topics like creation and configuration of storage accounts, Azure files, importing and exporting data to Azure, and implementing Azure backups. Third, deploying and managing virtual machines, holding a weightage from 15 to 20%, covering topics in creation and configuration of virtual machines for Windows and Linux, managing Azure VMs and automating their deployments and managing their backups. Third, we have deploying and managing virtual machines, holding a weightage from 15 to 20%, covering topics in creation and configuration of virtual machines for Windows and Linux, managing Azure VMs and automating their deployments and managing their backup. Fourth one is configure and manage virtual networks, which holds a majority of weightage of around 30 to 35% and covering topics in create connectivity between virtual networks, implementing and managing virtual networking, network security groups, Azure load balancer, monitoring and troubleshooting virtual networks, integrating on-premises network with Azure virtual network. And the fifth one and the last one is manage identities, holding a weightage from 15 to 20% in the exam. Managing Azure Active Directory and AD objects, users, groups and devices, implementing and managing hybrid identities and multi-factor authentication are being covered in this module. So now for AZ203 exam. So guys, the entire exam syllabus has been divided into 6 modules based on the feedbacks again. So developing Azure infrastructure as a service compute solutions, which holds a relative weightage of 10 to 15% in the module. So in these modules, you need to be thoroughly prepared with creating containerized solutions, implementing batch jobs by using Azure batch services, and implementing solutions that use virtual machines. Second, we have develop Azure platform as a service compute solutions, where it holds a weightage of 20 to 25% in the exam, covering topics like creating Azure App Services, Web Apps, and API Apps, Azure App Service mobile apps, and implementing Azure functions. And the third one is the developing for Azure storage, holding a weightage from 15 to 20%, covering the topics in developing solutions that use Blob storage, relational database, Cosmos DB storage, and storage tables. And the fourth one is the implementing Azure security, holding a weightage from 15 to 20% and covering topics in implementing access control, authentication, and secure data solutions. Now the fifth one is monitoring, troubleshooting and optimizing Azure solutions, holding a weightage from 15 to 20% in the exam. Instrumenting solutions to support monitoring and logging, integrating caching and content delivery with the solutions, and developing code to support scalability of apps and services are being covered in this module. And the last one is connect to and expand Azure services and third-party services, which holds a weightage of 20 to 25% in the exam and covering topics in establishing API gateways, integrating Azure search within solutions, and developing an app service logic app. And similarly, for AZ 300 and 301 exam, it covers topics in deploy and configure infrastructure, implement workloads and security, create and deploy apps, implement authentication and secure data, develop for the cloud and Azure storage, determine workload requirements. Then after this comes the designing part. That is the design for identity and security, design a data platform solution, design a business continuity strategy, design for deployment, migration and integration, design an infrastructure strategy. Now at last for 70776. Though this certification is on the verge of retirement, but its syllabus is not going to be any different than the current version. However, few transition will be there, like the removal of few topics or just merge them with any topics, right? So if we talk about such objectives, then design and implement complex event processing by using Azure Stream Analytics, holding a weightage from 15 to 20%, which includes the topics like ingest data for real-time processing, design and implement Azure Stream Analytics, implement and manage the streaming pipeline, query real-time data by using the Azure Stream Analytics query language. Then the next one is design and implement Azure SQL Data Warehouse solutions. Again, holding a weightage from 15 to 20%, including the topics like design tables in Azure SQL Data Warehouse, query data in Azure SQL Data Warehouse, integrate Azure SQL Data Warehouse with the other services. Then design and implement cloud-based integration by using Azure Data Factory. To implement datasets and linked services, move, transform and analyze data by using Azure Data Factory activities, orchestrate data processing by using Azure Data Factory pipelines, monitor and manage Azure Data Factory, other topics included in this. Now the last one is manage and maintain Azure SQL Data Warehouse, Azure Data Lake, Azure Data Factory and Azure Stream Analytics, holding a majority of weightage in the exam, that is 20 to 25%. So this module covers the topics and provision Azure SQL Data Warehouse, Azure Data Lake, Azure Data Factory, Stream Analytics, implement authentication, authorization, auditing, manage data recovery for Azure SQL Data Warehouse, Azure Data Lake. So this module covers the topics and provision Azure SQL Data Warehouse, Data Lake, Data Factory, Stream Analytics, implement authentication, authorization, auditing, design and implement storage solution for big data implementations. So that's all for the objective part. So now let's move forward and discuss about the exam pattern, followed by how you should prepare for this exam. No doubt, the Microsoft Azure certification exams are one of the most challenging exams in the IT industry. Although the number of questions in this exam are subject to change over time, you can expect around 40 to 60 questions in this exam, and also you can expect different questions formats and tie-ups in this exam, including review screen, mark review, multiple choices, short answer, hot area, repeated answer choices, drag and drop, case studies, the best answer and active screen. All the questions in this exam can follow any of these question types. You will get around 150 minutes to complete the examination with an additional 30 minutes of sitting time. For the good results in the exam, it is required to follow the weight associated with each exam module during your Azure exam preparation. The pricing depends on which location you are taking your exam from. For example, if you are taking your exam in USA, then it is going to cost you around 160. But if you are taking it in India, then you will have to pay an amount of 4800 INR. And the pricing is subject to change without a notice from country to country. As the pricing does not include applicable taxes, you need to confirm with your examination provider for an exact fee. If you're a student, then you can get a fee reduction in the exam if you can submit your valid education credentials. Moreover, Microsoft Partner Network Program member, Microsoft trainers and academic program members are also eligible for the reduced pricing. Most of the Microsoft technical questions require a passing score of 700. Any score greater or equal to 700 will be marked as passed. Otherwise, it will be marked as failed. Most of the short questions in this exam are 1 point. If any question is worth more than that, then it will be indicated in the question part itself. Also note that there are no penalty for an incorrect answer. The exam is available only in English language. Now we know of the examination pattern. Let us discuss few of the tips for the exam preparation. How to prepare for this exam. The first tip is to plan the module structure and study accordingly. For an example, if you are going to start with app services and containers, then make sure you have already covered the topics of creating the app services, containers, container images and Docker files, so that you know the basics of implementing app services in the container. Or if you're going to implement the Azure backup, then you must know about how to create and configure the storage accounts along with the configuration of Azure files, so that you know the basics of implementing the configurations and storage account. You would require a lot of questions and verified study materials on Azure in order to earn good passing scores. You can refer to the official curriculum and study guide to plan your module study and get the right information. After that, practice simple tests online. Once gained enough knowledge with this, then you should be able to step up into the next part of practicing hands-on. And this is the most crucial part in your learning journey. So guys, you can easily perform hands-on in Azure services since Azure provides a free tier option for newbies and you get a $300 of credit in your Azure account. So in addition to that, check for the online training so that in case you have queries related to the subject, then you can clear them right away, and experts' help is always recommended. Last but not the least, join the forums related to Microsoft Azure and search for questions related to your subject and check out the questions asked by the other people and go through the answers posted by audiences. It will always be helpful for you. Last suggestion from my end is that go for dumps only when you are thoroughly prepared with the subject. You might be able to clear the exam and get certification from it, but believe me guys, you won't be job ready, as during the interview without the practical approach, you won't be able to crack it or be able to answer the questions by interviewer, because you took the shortcut to get certified, right? So be aware of the shortcuts, do a thorough study with the proper implementations in Azure and rise up in your career path. Alright, so now you might be wondering how to take time for all this research and study. That is where we at Intellipaat are here for you. We understand that you as professionals face problems to take out time for upskilling from your personal life, right? So that is why we have done all the hard work for you and have come up with the comprehensive courses on AZ 103, AZ 203, AZ 300 and 301 and Azure Data Lake and Data Factory. And each course is curated by the industry experts, which includes the different case studies and assignments based on each module along with the industry oriented projects. If you are interested, then you can go through the course details with the link provided in the description box. How AZ 103 came into existence? So guys, previously Azure had launched two new role-based certifications, that is AZ 100 and AZ 101, as a replacement of 7535 for the Microsoft Azure Administrator role. But recently on May 1st, 2019, both the AZ 100 and 101 exams got retired and replaced by AZ 103 exam. So if one is willing to become a Microsoft Certified Azure Administrator, then they should focus on AZ 103 exam preparation. That is how it came into existence. So all of a sudden transition from AZ 100 and 101 towards a new AZ 103 certification? There must be a reason behind this change, right? That we shall discuss as we move forward. So guys, in the early stages of the Microsoft Certified Azure Administrator Associate certification, Microsoft Learning received a lot of negative feedbacks about the new AZ 100 and 101 exams being very difficult for people to crack. Based on the feedbacks, they decided to combine the AZ 100 and 101 certification exams into a single AZ 103 certification exam, that is Microsoft Azure Administrator Certification exam. The combined AZ 103 exam is not merely a merging of the full AZ 100 and AZ 101 certification exam. The AZ 103 exam pulls in approximately 70% of its objectives from the AZ 100 exam and approximately 30% of its objectives from the AZ 101 exam. As a result of the transition, the AZ 100 and 101 certification exams are now retired as of May 1, 2019 and are no longer be able to scheduled or be taken. Additionally, the transition exam AZ 102 is also retired, as a single AZ 103 exam is the singular part to earning the Microsoft Certified Azure Administrator Associate certification. For those of you who are early achievers out there, I understand this may be a bit frustrating for you, but this change will simplify the certification process to attain it and is a good change to be made, right? Next is why you should opt for AZ 103 certification. So today, Microsoft Azure Administrator is ruled out to be one of the most esteemed job titles in the cloud industry. How? Since Azure is one of the pioneers in providing the cloud services and it has got majority of its shares in the cloud market worldwide after AWS, which means greater job opportunities, and no doubt it is being majorly used by majority of the Fortune 500 companies. Moreover, Azure Administrator profile guarantees attractive pay packages along with a solid career growth opportunities. According to the latest report, the average pay of an Azure Administrator ranges between $100K per annum, and an experienced Microsoft Azure Administrator can earn up to $120K per annum. So I guess this should be enough to satisfy a candidate who is willing to go for AZ 103 exam preparation. Moving forward, in order to be well prepared for AZ 103 exam, you must know that what are the prerequisites required for the exam, right? So you need to have at least intermediate server administration knowledge and skills, should have a basic knowledge of PowerShell, and a general familiarity with the cloud computing concepts. Now let's move forward and discuss about the exam objectives. So guys, due to constant feedbacks about the exam being difficult, Microsoft has divided the entire exam syllabus into 5 modules in order to ease the exam preparation. So let's discuss each of these modules below. Manage Azure subscriptions and resources. So this percentage figure that you see here basically indicates the relative weightage of the questions from each of the modules. If the percentage is higher, then you should expect more questions from that module and vice versa. So guys, in this module, you need to be thoroughly prepared with managing Azure subscriptions, resource groups, analyzing resource utilization and consumption, and managing role-based access control. Second, implement and manage storage, where it holds a weightage of 15 to 20% in exam, covering the topics like creation and configuration of storage accounts, Azure files, importing and exporting data to Azure, and implementing Azure backups. Third is deploying and managing virtual machines, holding a weightage from 15 to 20%, covering topics in creation and configuration of virtual machines for Windows and Linux, managing Azure virtual machines, and automating their deployments and managing their backups. Fourth one is configure and manage virtual networks, which holds a majority of weightage around 30 to 35% and covering topics in create connectivity between virtual networks, implementing and managing virtual networking, network security groups, Azure load balancer, monitoring and troubleshooting virtual networks, integrating on-premises network with Azure virtual network. Fifth and the last one is manage identities, holding a weightage from 15 to 20% in the exam. So managing Azure Active Directory and Active Directory objects, users, groups and devices, implementing and managing hybrid identities and multi-factor authentication are being covered in this module. Now let's move forward and discuss about the exam pattern. No doubt the AZ103 exam is one of the most challenging exams in the IT industry, right? Although the number of questions in this exam are subject to change over time. You can expect around 40 to 60 questions in this exam, and also you can expect different questions formats and types in this exam, including review screen, mark review, multiple choices, short answers, hot area, repeated answer choices, drag and drop, case studies, the best answer, and active screen. All the questions in this exam can follow any of these question types. You will get around 150 minutes to complete the examination with an additional 30 minutes of sitting time. For good results in the exam, it is required to follow the weight associated with each exam module during your AZ103 exam preparation. The pricing depends on which location you are taking your exam from. For example, if you're taking your exam in US, then it is going to cost you around $165. But if you're taking it in India, then you will have to pay an amount of 4,800 Indian rupees. And the pricing is subject to change without a notice from country to country. As the pricing does not include applicable taxes, you need to confirm with your examination provider for an exact fee. If you're a student, then you can get a fee reduction in the exam if you can submit your valid educational credentials. Moreover, Microsoft Partner Network Program member, Microsoft trainers, and Academy program members are also eligible for reduced pricing. So guys, most of the technical questions require a passing score of 700. AZ103 is not an exception. Any score greater or equal to 700 will be marked as passed. Otherwise, it will be marked as failed. Most of the short questions in this exam are one pointer. If any question is worth more than that, then it will be indicated in the exam part itself. Also note that there are no penalty for an incorrect answer. The exam is available only in English language. Now we know of the examination pattern. Now let's discuss few other tips for the preparation of the exam. How to prepare for AZ103 exam. The first step is to plan the module structure and study accordingly. For example, if you're going to implement Azure Backup, then you must also know about how to create and configure the storage accounts along with configuration of Azure files, right? So that you know the basics of implementing the configurations in storage accounts, right? You would require a lot of AZ103 questions and verified study materials in order to earn good passing scores, right? You can refer to the official curriculum and study guide to plan your module study and get the right information. After that, practice sample test online. Once gain enough knowledge with this, then you should be able to step up into the next part of practicing hands-on, and this is the most crucial part in your learning journey. You can easily perform hands-on in Azure services since Azure provides a free tier option for newbies, and you get a $300 of credit in your Azure account once you're signed, which is valid for almost a year. Practicing hands-on will not only help you in cracking the exam, but it will also get you ready for your future job roles. In addition to that, check for the online training so that in case you have queries related to the subject, you can clear them right away, and experts' help is always recommended. Last but not the least, join the forums related to Microsoft Azure and search for questions related to your subject and check out the questions asked by the other people and go through the answers posted by the audience itself. It will always be helpful for you. Last suggestion from my end is that go for dumps only when you are thorough with the subject. You might be able to clear the exam and get certification from it, but believe me guys, you won't be job ready, as during the interview, without the practical approach, you won't be able to crack it or be able to answer the questions asked by the interviewer because you took the shortcut to get certified, right? So beware of the shortcuts, do a thorough study with the proper implementations in Azure and rise up in your career path. Now, you might be wondering how to take time for all this research and study. That is why we at Intellipaat are here for you. We understand that you as professionals face problems to take time out for skilling up from your personal life. That is why we have done all the hard work for you and have come up with a comprehensive course on AZ103 certification exam. So let's move forward. How AZ203 came to existence. So guys, before 203 certification exam was introduced, AZ200 and 201 were in the picture in order to get certified as an Azure Associate Developer. But both of these exams got retired and AZ203 took their place. That is how it came into existence. Everything happens for a reason, and there must be a reason behind this change, right? That we shall discuss as we move forward. Reason for this change. So guys, in the early stages of Microsoft Certified Azure Developer Associate Certification, Microsoft Learning received a lot of negative feedbacks about the beta exam being very difficult for people to crack, which are AZ200 and AZ201. Based on the feedbacks, they decided to combine the AZ200 and AZ201 certification exams into a single AZ203 exam, that is the Developing Solutions for Microsoft Azure Certification exam. So guys, the combined AZ203 exam is not merely a merging of the full AZ200 and AZ201 certification exam. So this AZ203 exam pulls in approximately 70% of its objectives from the AZ200 exam and approximately 30% of its objectives from the AZ201 exam. As a result of the transition, the AZ200 and 201 certification exams are now retired and are no longer be able to schedule or be taken. Additionally, the transition exam AZ202 is also retired as a single AZ203 exam is a singular path to earning the Microsoft Certified Azure Developer Associate Certification. And guys, for those of you who are early achievers out there, this may be a bit frustrating for you, I know that. But this change will simplify the certification process to attain it and is a good change to be made. Next, why you should opt for AZ203 certification. So guys, today Microsoft Azure Developer is ruled out to be one of the most esteemed job titles in the cloud industry. How? Since Azure is one of the pioneers in providing cloud services and it has got majority of its shares in cloud market worldwide after AWS, which means greater job opportunities, and no doubt it is being majorly used by majority of the Fortune 500 companies. According to the latest report, the average pay of an Azure developer is more than $120,000 per annum. And it isn't a secret that an experienced Microsoft Azure developer can earn up to $200,000 per annum. So I guess this should be enough to satisfy a candidate who is willing to go for AZ203 exam preparation. Moving forward, in order to be well prepared for AZ203 exam, you must know that what are the prerequisites for the exam, right? So you need to have at least 1 year of experience in development of scalable solutions that span through the entire software development lifecycle, including software design, development, deployment, testing, and maintenance. You should have a prior experience and knowledge with the Azure platform. Also, you must have a past experience in developing applications using the programming languages such as C#, Python, etc. Now let's move forward and discuss about the exam objectives. Due to the constant feedbacks about the exam being difficult, Microsoft has divided the entire exam syllabus in 6 modules in order to ease the exam preparation. Let us discuss each of these modules below. Developing Azure Infrastructure as a Service Compute Solutions. So guys, this percentage figure that you see here, that is 10 to 15%, here basically indicates the relative weightage of the questions from each of the modules. If the percentage is higher, then you should expect more questions from that module and vice versa. So in this module, you need to be thoroughly prepared with creating containerized solutions, implementing batch jobs by using Azure Batch Services, and implementing solutions that use virtual machines. Second, develop Azure Platform as a Service Compute Solutions, where it holds a weightage of 20 to 25% in exams covering topics like creating Azure App Service, web apps, and API apps. So also it covers the topics such as Azure App Services, mobile apps, and implementing Azure functions. Third, developing Azure Storage, holding a weightage of 15 to 20%, covering the topics like developing solutions that use Blob storage, relational database, Cosmos database storage, and storage tables. Fourth one is implementing Azure security, holding a weightage of 15 to 20% and covering topics in implementing access control, authentication, and secure data solutions. Fifth one is monitoring, troubleshooting, and optimizing Azure solutions, holding a weightage of 15 to 20% in the exam. Instrumenting solutions to support monitoring and logging, integrating caching and content delivery with solutions, and developing code to support scalability of apps and services are being covered in this module. And the last one is connect to and expand Azure services and third-party services, which holds a weightage of 20 to 25% in exam, and covering topics in establishing API gateways, integrating Azure search within solutions, and developing an app service logic app. Now let's move forward and discuss about the exam pattern. No doubt, the AC203 exam is one of the most challenging exams in the IT industry. Although the number of questions in this exam are subject to change over time. You can expect around 40 to 60 questions in this exam, and also you can expect different question formats and tie-ups in this exam, including review screen, mark review, multiple choices, short answer, hot area, repeated answer choices, drag and drop, case studies, the best answer, and active screen. All the questions in this exam can follow any of these question types. You will get around 150 minutes to complete the examination with an additional 30 minutes of sitting time. For good results in the exam, it is required to follow the weightage associated with the exam module during your AC203 exam preparation. The pricing depends on which location you are taking your exam from. For an example, if you're taking your exam in USA, then it is going to cost you around $165. But if you're taking it in India, then you will have to pay an amount of 4800 Indian rupees, and the pricing is subject to change without a notice from country to country. As the pricing does not include applicable taxes, you need to confirm with your examination provider for an exact fee. If you're a student, then you can get a fee reduction in the exam if you can submit your valid educational credentials. Microsoft trainers and Academy program members are also eligible for reduced pricing. Most of the Microsoft technical questions require a passing score of 700. AC203 is not an exception here. Any score greater or equal to 700 will be marked as passed, otherwise it will be marked as failed. So most of the short questions in this exam are 1 point. If any question is worth more than that, then it will be indicated in the exam part itself. Also, note that there are no penalty for an incorrect answer. The exam is available only in English language. As we know of the examination pattern, now let's discuss few of the tips for the preparation of the exam. How to prepare for AC203 exam. So guys, the first step is to plan the module structure and study accordingly. For an example, if you're going to start with the app services and containers, then make sure you have already covered the topics for creating the app services, containers, container images, and Docker files, so that you know the basics of implementing app services in the container. You would require a lot of AC203 questions and verified study materials to earn good passing scores. You can refer to the official curriculum and study guide to plan your module study and get the right information. After that, practice sample tests online. Once gained enough knowledge with this, then you should be able to step up into the next part of practicing hands-on, and this is the most crucial part in your learning journey. You can easily perform hands-on in Azure services since Azure provides a free tier option for newbies, and you get a $300 of credit in your Azure account once you have signed, which is valid for almost a year. Practicing hands-on will not only help you in cracking the exam, but it will also get you ready for your future job roles. In addition to that, check for the online trainings so that in case you have queries related to the subject, you can clear them right away. And experts' help is always recommended. Last but not least, join the forums related to Microsoft Azure and search for questions related to your subject and check out the questions asked by other people and go through the answers posted by the audience itself. It will always be helpful for you. So guys, the last suggestion from my end is that go for dumps only when you are thorough with the subject. You might be able to clear the exam and get certification from it, but believe me, you won't be job ready. As during the interview, without the practical approach, you won't be able to crack it or able to answer the questions by interviewer because you took the shortcut to get certified, right? So beware of the shortcuts. Do a thorough study with the proper implementations in Azure and rise up in your career path. Now you might be wondering how to take time for all this research and study, right? That is why we at Intellipaat are here for you. We understand that you as professionals face problems to take time out for skilling up from your personal life, right? That is why we have done all the hard work for you and have come up with a comprehensive course on AC203 certification exam. If you're interested, then you can go through the course details with the link provided in the description box.
Before AZ 300 and AZ 301 was introduced, 7535 was the examination conducted to certify as an Azure architect. Let's see the reason behind this change. We all definitely have a good number of applications on our phone. Every time there's a new update for the application, you'll receive a pop-up notification asking you to update the application. The same way, Azure had new features added to it every year once. Every time there is an update, the examinations also have to be updated, hence the transition. The scope of the 7535 exam was to focus exclusively on design and architecture elements and eliminate tactical implication details. But Azure AZ 300 and AZ 301 focuses on Azure Architect technologies and Azure Architect design respectively. Now, as we know why this transition has happened, let's see what is taught in Azure AZ 300. In Azure AZ 300 and 301, the test consists of 139 questions. Azure AZ 300 follows the following objectives. The Deploy and Configure Infrastructure module consists 34% of questions in the examination. Implement Workloads and Security module has 23% of the questions based from this module. Create and Deploy Apps has 10% of the questions in the examination. Implement Authentication and Secure Data, 8% of the questions are based on this domain. Develop the Cloud has 25% of the questions based from this domain in the examination. Next, let's see what is taught in Azure 301 and what percentage of questions are asked from each module. Azure AZ 300 follows the following objectives. Determining workload requirements, which has 10 to 15% of the questions based on this domain. Designing for identity and security has 20 to 25%. Designing a data platform solution has 15 to 20%. Designing a business continuity strategy has 15 to 20%. Designing for deployment, migration and integration has 10 to 15% of the questions. And last, designing an infrastructure strategy has 15 to 20% of the questions based on this domain in the examination. Next, let's see on why you should learn or opt for AZ 300 and 301. To become an Azure Solution Architect expert, you need to get certified by Microsoft. What happens once you get certified? Your chances of getting hired gets increased by 25 to 30%. Also, in addition to that, you also get paid more compared to the peers who are not certified. Next, let's see what are the prerequisites required to learn AZ 300 and AZ 301. For admin, you will need basic networking knowledge, basic OS knowledge, knowledge of PowerShell, basic understanding of Active Directory concepts including domain, users and domain controllers, and basic understanding of database concepts including table and simple queries. For development, you will need experience with Azure, programming in at least one Azure supported language which is C#, C# script, JavaScript, Java or Python. In addition to that, a minimum 1 year of experience in developing scalable solutions through phases of software development is also required to learn AZ 300 and AZ 301 at a faster and better rate. Now, let's move on to the basics required for the examination. The AZ 300 and AZ 301 exams are one of the most challenging exams in the IT industry. Although the number of questions in the AZ 300 exam is subject to change over time, you can expect around 40 to 60 questions if you are taking this exam now. You can expect different question formats and types in this exam, including review screen, mark review, multiple choice, short answer, hot area, repeated answer choices, drag and drop, case studies, build list, the best answer, and active screen. Just like in the case of number of questions, it is not necessary that you will get all these types of questions in the exam, but all the questions in the exam will follow any of these question types. You will get around 150 minutes to complete the examination with an additional 30 minutes of sitting time. For good results in the exam, it's required to follow the weight associated with each exam module during your AZ 300 exam preparation. The pricing depends on which location you are taking your exam from. For example, if you're taking the exam in US, then you'll have to pay about $165, but if you are taking it in India, then you'll have to pay 4,800 rupees. The pricing is subject to change without notice from country to country. As the pricing doesn't include applicable taxes, you need to confirm with your examination provider for an exact fee. If you are a student, you are eligible for a fee reduction in the exam if you can submit your valid educational credentials. Microsoft Partner Network program members, Microsoft trainers, and Academy program members are also eligible for reduced pricing. Most of the Microsoft technical questions require a passing score of 700. AZ 300 and 301 is not an exception. Any score greater than or equal to 700 will be marked as pass, otherwise it will be marked as fail. Most of the short answer questions in this exam are worth 1 point. If any question is worth more than that, it will be indicated in the question part itself. Also, note that there are no penalty for incorrect answers. The exam is available only in English language. As we now know what the examination pattern is, let's see few tips to prepare for the exam. How to prepare for AZ 300 and AZ 301. The first step to take when constructing your study plan is to plan accordingly and knowing your modules. You will need a lot of AZ 300 and AZ 301 questions and verified study materials to earn a good passing score in AZ 300 and 301 examination. Refer the official study guide to get the right information. Once you're done with that, practice sample tests online. With this knowledge, I think it is safe to step up your game by practicing hands-on. This is the most important step in your learning journey. Are you wondering how you would perform hands-on for the Azure services? Let me tell you how. Azure provides a free tier option for newbies. You get a $300 credit in your Azure account once you sign up, which is valid for almost a year. This will not only help you in cracking the exam, but it will also get you ready for your future job role. In addition to that, check for trainings online so that in case you have any queries related to the subject, you can clear them right away. An expert's help is always recommended. Last but not the least, join forums related to Microsoft Azure. Look up for questions pertaining to your subject, check out the questions asked by other people and also go through the answer. It may always come in handy. At last, a suggestion. If you search, there are numerous shortcuts to getting yourself certified in any particular exam, like going through exam dumps or previously conducted Azure exams. Although that might help you crack the exam, it will take away the experience you get when you learn everything in depth. And believe me, I've been to and conducted numerous interviews for Azure profiles. People who get certified, they are not job ready. Why? Because they took the shortcut to get themselves certified. So beware of all these shortcuts. Do a thorough study with proper implementations in Azure and rise up in your career ladder. Now you might be wondering how to take time out of all this research and study. That is where we at Intellipaat are here for. We at Intellipaat understand that you as professionals face problems to take time out from skilling up from your personal life. That's why we have done all the hard work for you and have come up with a comprehensive course on AZ 300 and AZ 301 certification exam. If you are interested, you can go through the course details with the link provided in the description box.
Okay guys, we've come to the end of this session. I hope this session on Microsoft Azure was useful for you. And if you have any doubts, feel free to comment over it below and we'll love to help you out. Thank you.